Are you ready, Brad, for us?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So first of all, and very importantly, I want to thank Brad Wells for putting all this together, which he's done for us now. This is the third time. We appreciate it very much. And certainly many thanks to Herrington Cheney for generously supporting us doing these things. We couldn't thank those two gentlemen more than we, it gives us a wonderful opportunity to meet you folks and to share some of this information. We are, of course, those of you who aren't familiar with us, we're the Coast Guard Auxiliary. We are, pardon? What? We are the, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a little bit louder. A little bit louder.
A little louder?
A little bit louder.
Go ahead. Go ahead, just talk for a second.
Okay, good. Is that good? So it's the United States Coast Guard Auxiliary. We are part of the Coast Guard, Team Coast Guard. We are established by statute in 1936, so we're having our 86th year this year. We're an all-volunteer force multiplier for the Coast Guard. We do everything the Coast Guard does except for law enforcement and military operations. And we are always interested in new membership. I left a couple of brochures back there. If anybody's interested, you can grab one of those or see one of us. And we're happy to have you come chat with us and come to one of our meetings, see what we do. If you're interested in underwater patrols, we do those. We do air patrols. We do all kinds of search and rescue. We do environmental issues, pollution, logistics, watch standing. Sometimes if you're on the radio talking to the Coast Guard, you might be talking to one of us. It's just about anything you can imagine that the Coast Guard does other than those two things, we do. And we're trained just like the Coast Guard is. And even though we're volunteers and we're not paid, one of the features of the Coast Guard Auxiliary is free education. Our certifications are the same as the Coast Guard, so you can get quite a bit of training on the Coast Guard's dime if you do become an auxiliarist. And that is one of the most fascinating parts of all of this. So, for example, if you like navigation, we have an advanced coastal navigation course, which is 3 months long, which is terrific. I mean, you'll learn more than you ever thought you could learn about doing charting and plotting and using some of the equipment that Navy ships use to navigate. So that's my pitch on that, and please, if anybody's interested, let us know. We have another auxiliarist here from Washington State, Doug Smith, who we're hoping will actually join our flotilla. We're the Herring Bay flotilla. Herring Bay is, of course, right here, and that's hence their name. But there are flotilla. The flotilla is the primary unit of the Coast Guard Auxiliary. So we are located across the country, and we're divided again by districts and divisions. So a series of flotillas form a division, and the divisions form a district. And these match up with the Coast Guard districts, obviously. So I wanted to also tell you about two other things before we get into the meat of this course. By the way, this is the brochure about what the Coast Guard Auxiliary is all about. There's some brochures back there on right sizing a life jacket, and so you might want to pick one of those up. Unfortunately, we were short of supply of the other two. And this is vessel exams. If anybody wants to have a vessel exam, they're free. There's no penalty if you don't pass, but you'll know at least what you need to pass. And then we'll come back if for example, if your fire extinguisher is out of date. Didn't used to be a requirement, but now Coast Guard changed the rules a few years ago. I think it might be 3 years ago. A fire extinguisher is only acceptable for 12 years from the date that's stamped on it. So underneath is usually where the date is stamped. If it's older than 12 years, we won't be able to pass you, but you'll know. You can go get one at West Marine, We can come back and finish the inspection, and then you get a sticker. And the sticker goes on your port side, if you have a window, whatever, or on the port side of the mast even. And if the Coast Guard or the Marine Police are out there inspecting boats, if you have that sticker, it's unlikely that you'll have to be inspected. And unless I use this example, you've heard me say this before, unless you're out on deck with a bottle of bourbon like this, they might want to pull you over and ask you why you're doing that, because that's illegal. So other than that, it's a nice thing to have this little sticker. Like I say, we do these all year long. So if you want to sign up, let us know after the course. We'll take your name down and we'll arrange for a convenient time to come and check out your boat. There's also a little card back there. I don't have it here. And the card has a QR code on it that takes you to NOAA for registering personal locator beacons and EPIRBs. So it's a handy little quick way to get to the information about how to do that. And we're going to get into that a little bit more when we talk about the MMSI number and those things later on. So also, one last announcement. We are giving the Maryland Boating Safety course, the full course, which awards the certificate, the DNR certificate. We are DNR instructors as well. And if you have that certificate, that is good in every state that requires anyone to have a safety course to operate a boat. If you were born after July 1st, 1972, you cannot operate a vessel in Maryland and in many other, I think it's 40 other states, without having this certificate. So if you want to take this course, this is a free course because thanks to the Anne Arundel County Library Foundation, we put it on every year. So the fourth year we're doing it at the Edgewater Library. And the dates, it's 2 Saturdays. The first Saturday is 10 to 4, 10 to 4:30. The second Saturday is like 10 to 2. At the Edgewater Library, if you want to sign up for that course, or you have family members, children, anybody over 12 years old can take this course and get their certificate. We give an exam the second day, but if you take the course, you'll pass the exam. So it's not a big deal.
When is it?
It's April 5th, Saturday, April 5th, and Saturday, April 12th. Yes?
Is this an online course equivalent to that, or not?
It is not an online, the question is it an online course? It's not an online course. You have to attend this one. There are online courses, but in my opinion, and I think my fellow instructors share this, the online courses really are short, and they don't really give you a lot of information. So I recommend if you have the time and you can attend this thing, you'll get a lot more value out of it. The second day, we are usually finished by 2 with administering exams and awarding the certificates, but we also add, for those who can stay longer, we'll get you a little bit more familiar with operating a VHF radio. Some of that we're going to touch on today. We'll spend some time, more time in that second afternoon on operating the radio correctly. We'll also give you some advice about charting, how to use charts, and then we'll also do knot tying, and we'll help folks who have trouble with bowlines and cleats and that kind of stuff. We'll go over a little bit of that too. So anyway, for those folks in your family, for example, who aren't regular boaters, this is a great opportunity. If they're going to someday be running your boat or running a boat, this is the opportunity for them to get that under their belt. Doug? Yeah.
Are courses that you take in other states, are they reciprocal?
Yes, not every state, but most states, if it's an ASLBA approved course, then it's nationally recognized. So, and this course in Maryland is an ASLBA course. And that means that that certificate is good in New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, and Michigan, and California, and all these states now that have imposed this rule. And so to get into the meat of it, this Coast Guard statistics from 2022. There's a lag by the time they gather these statistics and then they report them. So I'm going to give you two pieces of information from the 2022 work. One is 74% of boating fatalities nationally, in 74% of the cases, the operator of the vessel had no safety training. So that's a pretty interesting statistic. Almost 3/4 of the people who died in those accidents were in a boat operated by somebody who had no safety training. So keep that in mind. And the other thing, which we're going to harp on a little bit, is another study, another part of that whole 2022 study. It indicates that 75% of the victims who died in 2022 drowned. 85% of them were not wearing life jackets. We use the statistic roughly, it's 9 out of 10. 9 out of 10 deaths in drownings, people were not wearing a life jacket. So, I mean, that's like 9 out of 10 people that might still be around if they had just worn a life jacket. This is, if you take nothing away from today, and you don't generally wear your life jacket, this would be the most important thing we're telling you, is wear your life jacket. It just makes all the difference in the world. It's not a big deal. I use the analogy to seatbelts. Seatbelts were a pain in the neck when we first were required to use them. But now you don't even think about it. I find this is the same is true of these inflatable life jackets. I brought one along with me. This is mine. We have the Coast Guard bulkier things that we're required to wear, but it also has pockets. We require to carry a lot of gear with us. But these things are so easy to use. I forget I have it on. If I'm out by myself, I walk off the boat often and just not even realize that this has been on. So it's that easy to get used to. So this course is basically our curriculum for today, and I'll come back to the life jacket. We're going to discuss what if something happens to one of you. If you're the boat operator, what happens to one of you? Is your crew ready? We're going to get into that. Proper lookout is something that is often ignored. Anchoring is one of the key elements of safety. We're going to get into that. And man overboard drills, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about what happens if a fire on board, what happens if you capsize, what happens if you're on the ground, and then using the VHF radio. So here are the statistics again, but these are, again, it varies from year to year, but the idea is roughly 9 out of 10. Sometimes it's 8 out of 10, sometimes 8.5 out of, the statistic varies between 8 and 9 out of 10 people who drowned weren't not wearing their life jacket. Oh, let me see, this is, children have special requirements. Fitting the life jacket properly is part of passing if you were inspected on the water by law enforcement, those life jackets have to fit you properly, which isn't usually a problem for adults, but for kids, it is a problem. So you have to make sure if you've got kids on board, those life jackets have to fit them properly. There's 3 or 4 different sizes. And the way to tell is if you put the life jacket on the child and you can lift it up and it comes up to their ears, it's not fitted properly. It's got to be tight enough so that they can't slide out of it if they fall in the water. So we no longer have to wear the top life jackets, but we do have the bottom ones. So can you imagine being on your sailboat and having this thing on? That's the way it used to be. So the pre-underway briefing is something that most folks don't do, but we're going to tell you why it's really important. Frank's going to get into that in a second. I wanted to just show you something about life jackets that I think is worth noting. couple things about inflatables, because so many of us use inflatables now. The inflatable has to be, if it's one that self-inflates, which this is, then you have to check that every 3 years. There's a bobbin in there. Not all of them work this way, but most of them work this way. Some of them have a meter that senses water pressure, and that's what fires them. But what fires this jacket and most jackets is the bobbin. It's usually yellow, and it's a circle, and that deteriorates when it hits the water. It melts away, and that allows the firing pin, which is spring-loaded, to pierce the cylinder and inflate the jacket. And those bobbins will gradually either harden or they'll deteriorate to an extent where they won't be operable. So if you think you've got a jacket that's going to self-inflate and it's over 3 years old, you might be wrong. That doesn't mean that the regular inflation, pulling the tag, won't work, but it may mean that the self-inflation feature, which you may be relying on, for example, if you're in a sailboat and you get hit by the boom and knocked into the water, you could be unconscious. You want that thing to go off by itself. So make sure that every 3 years, you open this thing up. The bobbin has a date on it, but I've never been able to see that date. I mean, there's a little window. You just can't read it. You just have to keep track of the 3-year cycle.
And what, you're gonna replace the whole,
Unfortunately, you can't. You might be able to find a place that sells just the bobbins.
you replace the whole thing.
You can replace the whole thing. It's probably a good idea to replace the whole thing anyway, because a lot of people don't realize that the cylinders themselves, I don't have one with me right now, but the cylinders themselves will rust out, and you won't even know it. I mean, just by sitting on your boat for 3 years. And so we've seen some that are so deteriorated that you can barely see the silver cover on them. I mean, they're just all rust. And those are very suspicious. You couldn't trust those. So when you buy the recharging kit, it usually includes a new cylinder and a bobbin. And it's easy. And inside all of these life jackets, there's a little set of instructions on how to replace that thing. It's pretty simple. Another thing that we encourage people to do is to always carry a whistle. So like this life jacket, one of the reasons I like this one, I have half a dozen of these different varieties of these suspender type life jackets. I like this one because it's so easy to refold, because it's just 2 folds rather than an insert that has to fold 3 or 4 different ways. Not that that's hard, but this is much simpler. But I also like to carry a few extra pieces of safety equipment. This is just the inflator that everyone has. All of these things have them. So if for some reason you're in the water for a long time and you start losing your flotation, even if it's getting a little bit soft, all you need to do is pop this top off and blow it up, and it'll fill right up again. I like to carry a signal mirror. Just weighs nothing. If you're in the water and there's a helicopter trying to find you and the sun is out, you don't need a lot of brightness, not a lot of sun. You can reflect this, and it'll go for miles, and those pilots will be able to pick up that reflection in the water.
Where do they sell them?
West Marine sells them. You can get these so many places, and they're cheap. A cheap protection. Whistle, absolutely have to have a whistle. In fact, you're required to have a whistle on your boat, or some sound-making device on your boat anyway. Even a raft has, if you're out on like a paddleboard, people don't realize this, but in addition to having a life jacket, you have to have a whistle. A whistle is required for anything that's considered a vessel, and that's a very broadly defined term. And anything you can get out on the water with, if you have a couple pieces of plywood and you tack them together and seal them so they don't leak, that's a vessel. So you have to have a life jacket and you have to have a whistle. And the other thing is some kind of a strobe light. There's a million different varieties of this. I like this one because I can tuck it in there and it doesn't take up any room. And this is water activated, or if like when I touched it now, it goes off. But that's just a test. It'll see it stopped. But if it's in the water, it will stay. This little thing will operate for 24 hours, I think. That's pretty. So if you're in the water, if you're out on a boat in the daylight, you're thinking I'm not going to be out in the water at night. But if nobody can rescue you in time, it may very well be that you're out at night. So it's always nice to have some kind of, and there are a million different varieties. You can get them pen light size, you can get larger ones. We have larger ones that we use that are water activated. We have to have on our Coast Guard vests, but just a thought. Frank, I'll give you the.
You know, you're like, oh, that's too loud.
I think that's good to me. Let's see.
Okay, so you, boat owners, operators, when you get out on your boat, you take your boat out, you know where you're going, usually, right? But the thing is to let the people that come out with you, guests, family, they need to know also. Because if something happens to you, they have to relay that information to the Coast Guard. And we'll get through some of those points. So things, what are you going to be doing? You're going to be going out fishing? You're just going to be cruising around the bay? You're going to go out to St. Michael's to go to lunch or something like that? Common kind of things. What's the weather going to be? Always check the weather. And don't just check it before you go out, because here in Maryland, the weather can change from hour to hour, and you need to keep an eye out. We teach in our boating safety course that most of our weather comes from the west. Not exclusively, but most of it. So you always need to keep your eye out for clouds, any kind of weather patterns that are coming in from the west. Have you given your schedule to somebody? Now you may say, well, I always go out at a certain time and come back. But if for some reason your boat breaks down, you get stuck, or you're at a restaurant and you decide to stay a little longer because you have to wait, when can people expect you to be home, to be back? Because if you don't show up, then they're going to call the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard's going to ask a lot of questions, and they need to know a lot of information to pass on. Important phone contacts. We have one here on the board for the Coast Guard station in Annapolis. That should be on your speed dial. If something happens, yes, going through 911 is definitely an option, but the 911 operator is going to gather information, and guess what they're going to do? They're going to pass it on to the Coast Guard. So what you need to do is contact the Coast Guard directly. It saves a lot of time that way.
Frank, let me interrupt just for a second. We're going to be interrupting each other a lot, and by the way, you interrupt us anytime you want. We welcome as many questions as we can get. But I wanted to tell you also, since Frank was talking about the Coast Guard station in Annapolis phone number, also the Coast Guard, for those of you who don't already know this, has a wonderful app, and it's free, and it has all these buttons on it that you can check on weather buoys, you can check on rules of the road, you can request a safety check, you can file a float plan, and the bottom button on it is an emergency assistance button. So this is a wonderful extra safety measure to have, and it's free.
We have a lot of technology out there now, and we take advantage of it. Medical issues. If you have somebody on your boat that has a medical problem, you need to know about it. Say they're diabetic, or they have a heart condition, something like that. You want to know, because if they start showing any kind of signs of distress, you'll be able to call for help. Okay, you need to show the people on the boat where your safety equipment is. Fire extinguishers, flares, life jackets. Don't expect them to go hunting around looking for it if something happens to you, because you're going to get lost.
Which number?
So, where do you keep your life jackets? Anybody? Under the bunker, in the cabin, right? No. The Coast Guard has a regulation about life jackets. You must have one jacket for every person on board, okay? And it must fit them. And the third requirement is it must be readily acceptable. Now, the Coast Guard defines readily acceptable as being available in case of an emergency, a fire on board, sinking, something like that. Now, think about it. If something's happening and you have to get off that boat quickly, you do not want to be messing around putting on a life jacket. especially if you get in the water. We're gonna demonstrate that later on today. So it's very important that everyone has a life jacket, they know where it is, they should try it on when they first get on the boat, make sure it fits them. You may think that, oh, this one will fit so-and-so. Too small, too big, not gonna work. You need to know that before you get underway. Where do you keep your fire extinguisher? A lot of boaters just stick them in a cabin somewhere, okay? You have a fire, how are you gonna find it? Especially if somebody's not familiar with your boat. You should have it mounted, it should be mounted next to the operator, because that's the person that's usually on the boat the most, and it should be visible. Okay, marine radio e-perps. A lot of people have gotten out of using or operating VHF radios. We rely now on your 911 cell phones for emergencies, and that's fine. But as Joel described later on, having a radio out at sea, even here on the bay, is a lot more valuable to you when you're looking for help. Because when you're dealing with your phone, you're talking to one person. When you're on your radio and you call channel 16 and you call Mayday, everyone in 25 miles can hear you. And they may be a lot closer to you than how long it takes the Coast Guard to get out to you or somebody else. And that's really important if you have a medical situation or your boat's sinking or something like that. Where's the anchor? How many people have done any kind of anchoring with their boats? Very good, very good. Anchoring is not an easy operation to go through. Joe's going to describe it in detail because there are a lot of things that you need to know. But if you get into a situation and you have to stop your boat and keep it from going someplace, the anchor is what's going to help you there. Flares, required by the Coast Guard that you have day and night flares on the boat. Make sure people on the boat know where they are and explain to them how to use them. A couple of things. Okay, those two. Boat's ignition. How do you stop the boat? If something happens to you as an operator, and you collapse, fall down, or whatever, and somebody's got to take over, do they know how to operate the boat? Can they even stop the boat? Do they know what a throttle is and how a throttle works? Now, if you're an operator, yeah, common sense to you, but to somebody who has no knowledge about boats, you get on a boat, what do they look for? They look for brake pads, an accelerator pedal. They think that steering wheel, just like a car, right? No. So don't assume that the next person that's going to take over, if something happens to you, is going to know how to operate the boat. Okay, what happens if somebody becomes now designated chief boat operator? Okay? Captain becomes ill, you collapse. Any number of reasons, medical, heat stroke, somebody's got to step in. Captain can fall overboard. It's happened. Somebody reaches over to get something, right into the water. Now the person on board the vessel has to maneuver that boat to bring you back on board. Can they do that? The captain addresses an onboard emergency. Emergencies can be as simple as an engine's not working, to an engine fire, which is very critical, probably most critical of all. Running aground, putting a hole in the bottom of your hull, sinking, something like that.
Or maybe your alarm goes off on your or indicating that you're taking on water or might be taking on water, and the captain goes to check that out. Somebody has to take over the helm for whatever, a few minutes. All the more reason why in the pre-briefing you're giving your crew all that information. You can do it in 5 minutes, and then they know what to do in any kind of emergency or disruption.
Okay, like I mentioned before, does the crew know where the throttle is, where it's located? Forward, neutral, reverse controls, pretty simple. And anybody who's operating the boat, fine, but somebody who hasn't, or a young child, maybe in a situation having to take command. It's happened. How do you stop the boat? Put it into neutral, right? The boats, most boats are going to coast for distance, depending on how fast they're going and how big they are. Turning off the engine, steering the boat, all important. Keeping a proper lookout. A lot of people think that having a lookout is just having an extra person with an extra set of eyes. That's not enough. You have to look 360 degrees. Boats come up real fast. They can come from the side, they can come from the stern. If they do, you have to react very quickly. So you need to have somebody, if you're concentrating on steering your boat as the operator, you need somebody else looking around behind you to see somebody coming up in the back. Operating dewatering devices. This is good, but it's only good for very small boat. It's not going to be, most people, they do make larger ones though. Buckets are fine. What a bucket you're going to find if you're trying to dewater a boat, it's going to get really straight, start having a lot of problems from the back. These work probably the best. Well, you find one bigger one for your boat. Anchoring. Joe's going to describe, say in detail, how to anchor your boat. For anyone who's forgotten how to do it or hasn't done it in a long time, it's important to know the steps in anchoring. And it's good to have the people on your boat that come out with you know how to do it too. The first priority as the operator, the owner of the vessel, saving lives. You can always replace a boat, you can't replace a life. It's that simple. And as we talk about in our boating safety class, under the section of legal requirements, you as the boat owner, the operator, are responsible if something happens, especially if there's a loss of life. Make sure everyone has a life jacket, and they should be wearing one. We don't legally require you to have it if you're an adult while you're on the boat, but we certainly would like you to wear them. Stop the boat. If you see something, anything that looks strange, somebody's operating the boat that looks unusual, stop your boat. Take the time, assess the situation, and see what's going on. That's the one advantage you have as the operator. You always stop your boat and decide what's going on and then move on. Okay, how critical or urgent is the situation? If somebody scraped their arm, that's not too bad. They usually put Band-Aid or something to stop the bleeding, something like that. However, if somebody is collapsed, had a heart attack, something like that, then you have to start thinking about what kind of help do I need? What can I do? How much further I have to go in getting other help? So if you can't handle it, call for help. And there's help that's out there. Who should take charge? If the operator of the boat is the one who's most experienced in trying to do any kind of first aid, that person may then have to turn the operation of the boat over to somebody else. Who is that person going to be? Hopefully it's somebody who's most experienced and can do it.
And in the pre-brief, you can make that decision ahead of time so that, so-and-so, you're going to take over. Sometimes to me, I want you to take over. And then they can ask you any questions that they have about what they need to do. But yeah.
Okay, once again, where's the safety gear? Fire extinguishers, flares, all that. And is there anybody who's able to operate the boat? That you need to determine before you get underway.
Okay, so before we get into this, there's a couple of other things that I wanted to mention, following up on what Frank said about radios. I brought a couple along with me, and I wanted to show you. One thing I always do when I'm especially if I'm by myself, is I have this little light radio. You can get these for $100 at West Marine, and I just clip it onto my strap and my life jacket. And then I always have the ability, if I fall in the water, to call for help. And we can give you lots of examples of people that were drowned who fell off their boats where they're by themselves. They didn't have a life jacket on, and they had no way of communicating, especially in the edges of the season when there aren't many boats out there. And so if I'm out by myself, if somebody's on your boat with you, they can use the radio and call for help. But if you're by yourself, I mean, this little $100 item can make all the difference. And if you want to really go big, this radio has a GPS built into it, and it has a DSC button on the back. So not only are you transmitting for help, making a mayday call, but you push the DSC button, and we'll get into that later. Paul will get into this. And that sends your latitude and longitude to the Coast Guard on the Rescue 21 program. And now what was a search and rescue is just a rescue, because now they know where you are. They don't have to search for you. And one other thing I forgot to mention that I always put on my life jacket is a knife. And especially if you're a sailor, I'm more of a powerboater these days, but I've spent a lot of time on sailboats. If you were in a small sailboat and you capsize, you can easily get tangled up in lines and halyards, sheets, and a little knife, a little safety knife. These things are very cheap on Amazon or wherever. You can find them little inexpensive dive knives, and they can allow you to cut yourself free if that's necessary. So I think that's a must. Before we, yeah.
On that portable I got from the other day, you already have the one registered with its MSI number. What happens with this one? You have to register it also.
You have to, okay, so the question is, registering your MMSI number, we'll get into that in a little more detail, but in order for this radio does not have that feature, the little one. This is just my little light extra safety device. This one and the one on your boat, almost all radios sold since, I think, 2000 have this DSC button. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this. You lift up the little tab and you hold it for 3 to 5 seconds, and that sends your latitude and longitude to the Coast Guard. If you even don't have the time to make a mayday call on 16, which you should do, you should follow this up with a mayday call. But if you can't do that, that's fine. The Coast Guard's still going to get that digital transmission from your radio. And if you have kids on board or young people that aren't boaters, you want to show them where this button is and how to operate it. If you don't show them anything else before you leave the dock, show them how to push that button, what that button does and how to operate it. Again, you have to hold it for 3 to 5 seconds. But if you somehow had a heart attack or faint or whatever happens, and somebody else is on your boat with you, if they know how to do that simple function, that will get you help right away. So keep that in mind.
The portable one you have.
Pardon me?
You use this call.
I'm sorry.
The little one you have. What do you have?
With the little one, so I would just go to channel 16 and I would
So it will pick up channel 16.
oh yeah, and make a mayday call.
Okay.
I mean, that would be the main purpose of this radio. And that mayday call, as Frank was saying, that goes to everybody that has their radio on. So a cell phone is fine, but it's certainly a secondary alternative. This is the alternative to that you want to use as if you're in trouble. The first thing you want to do, if you have the DSC button, that's the first thing you do. If you don't have that, but you just have a handheld, you'll reach out for 5 miles, sometimes further than that, depending on the weather conditions, and hopefully somebody will be able to hear you. The accidents that we've seen happen, these were watermen. This happened 2 or 3 times, I think 3 or 4 times, in the fall a few years ago. The first one happened in September. A fellow was pulling crab pots in by himself. He called his wife. He said, "I'm going to be home in 20 minutes." 20 minutes went by, an hour went by. He didn't show up. She called for help. He fell off his boat. He didn't have any way of communicating. It was in early October. Water was cold. That could have contributed to the problem. But they found his boat on shore with the motor running, and they found him 3 days later. So if he had a life jacket on, he might have had a much better shot of being found. But if he had a radio, it would have made all the difference. I mean, so a young fella, there's a volunteer fireman down in near the bridge, the nice bridge.
If you have an older radio and you retrofit the VSC one,
No, you cannot. No, it's a sophisticated piece of equipment that's built into the radio, and so yeah. So, but it would have to be a pretty old radio not to have it. But they're around. And another thing, we'll get into this, but this radio has GPS built into it. Often the radios that you have on your boat, the newer ones will also have GPS built into it, which is nice because it doubles up on your ability to transmit. If your chart plotter isn't working for some reason, but your radio has GPS, and you push that button, you're still going to send your lat long to the Coast Guard. If you don't have a radio with GPS, then it's dependent on your connection to your chart plotter, because that's where it's getting the reading for your latitude and longitude. And the way to check on that is, if your radio is on and it's connected to your GPS, to your chart plotter, you'll see the lat long on the window. You don't see that on the window, then there's something wrong with your connection, and your latitude and longitude is not going to be transmitted, even if you push the the DSC button. So keep that in mind. One thing I forgot to do, and I apologize to my friends here, my fellow instructors, but we didn't introduce ourselves.
Yeah.
So, sorry about that. So, Paul, why don't you go first?
Hi folks, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Paul Manicone. I'm an auxiliarist and a Herrington Harbour slip holder. So I've been a slip holder for about 15 years here at North, and my kids are 19 and 20 years old, so that means I raised my kids here at the Marina and have lots of lifelong memories. And it's really fun to hear them reflect on their childhood now that they're young adults. So my day job is I'm a physician, so I like to do sort of the auxiliary health service work as well as vessel exams and constructing. Thanks for joining us today. You know, I always say, for me, I have more fun on the bay year after year as my seamanship grows and my safety knowledge grows, and my safety equipment grows. But the more prepared I feel, the more relaxed I am. And that's kind of the message that we're trying to convey to you, because we want you to have fun. We want you to have those lifelong memories. We just want you to do it safely and have the knowledge, skills, and experience to do it. Yes, sir.
Can I ask you a question as a physician? What would you say is the value of having a CPR class?
I think in general.
The question is
The question is the value of CPR.
You want to repeat your questions because the mics don't pick it up. So, sorry.
Yeah, one of my chief concerns is having a medical emergency.
Yeah.
You know, and needing to give someone CPR.
Yeah, so it's for me, obviously I'm biased, but I would say everybody should have a American Heart Association basic life support certification, especially if you're a captain. And those are easy to get on a weekend or even at a hospital or through the fire departments. We do a suddenly in command course, which is a much deeper dive into emergencies, and we get more into sort of how to manage different medical emergencies while underway. Yes, sir.
It helps if you are asking that questions to even have a little mask or masks that come in a little box. You open it up, and you can help, breathing
Yeah.
for them.
Yeah, it's a good comment.
It's nice to have those.
to have a bag,
part of your-
yeah.
One of those masks for people.
Yeah, so I always say scope up your first aid kit to match your competencies. So obviously mine is a bit more sophisticated, but in that, to his point, is an entire bag valve mask. Because having done CPR, many, many times, I know that you get exhausted pretty quickly. Rescue breathing as well as the chest compression. So in my kit, I have the bag as well as the mask for rescue breathing. But we can get into more of that later or after the course.
And gloves too, safety gloves, latex gloves or whatever. If you're allergic to latex, some alternative to that, yeah.
I'm Franco Caggio. I've been with the Coast Guard Auxiliary for about 28 years now. Great organization, great bunch of people. I highly recommend if you have the time, volunteer, please come and talk to one of us. We can explain some more about it. I'm a retired engineer, as a contractor with the FAA, so I have also not boating, but also some flying experience too. We really don't get much into working with Coast Guard helicopter, but it's also an option. If they need us, we'll come out and help them.
And active duty? Yeah.
Oh, I'm also former active duty Coast Guard and Coast Guard Reserve many years back. Spent a lot of time out at sea in the North Atlantic, so I've seen a lot of different situations, rescue situations, and I can tell you, having people that know what they're doing out there is what's going to save your life. It really is.
Yeah, so my name is Joe DiStefano, and collectively we have a lot of on-the-water experience. I started boating when I was 10 years old, and I didn't have courses like this, so most of my knowledge back in those days was by making mistakes. Not the best way to learn, I found. Getting thrown out of boats and that kind of stuff when you're a kid, doing stupid things. But I'm still here, so I'm lucky. I'm one of the lucky ones. I have been on most of the coastal waters on the eastern seaboard from New Jersey down to Florida. I've been offshore from New England down to Florida and out to the Bahamas. I once held a Coast Guard master's license, and it's my addiction. Boating is my addiction. I wasn't able to make a living at it. Joe's shaking his head. So yeah, so we're bringing collectively to you as much of our own personal experience as we are what's in the book. Okay, so let me get to the. Do I have the? Sorry, where is it? Oh, thank you. Okay, so this particular part of the course on I was particularly interested in giving some more background to you guys about this, because some of you may or may not be familiar with this book. Is the federal rules, the Coast Guard's book on all boating rules and regulations, and it's titled Navigation Rules and Regulations Handbook, but it's commonly referred to as the coal regs. And the coal regs is short for collision regulations. So what it tells you is the coal regs are the whole design of this program is to prevent collision. And if you look through these rules, they just are replete with references to what you must do to avoid collision. We have what's called rules of the road. I'm going to touch on it a little bit. But the rules of the road are not like driving a car where you have a red light and a green light. The rules of the road are suspended if you need to ignore them to avoid a collision. The primary goal is to avoid a collision. And the first rule of substance is Rule 5. Now, the beginning of the book starts with the application of the rules, the responsibility, it's just generic terms like that. But the first real rule, and it's so important, this rule, because it will not only guide how you run your boat, but it will also guide liability if anything, God forbid, happens to you, somebody runs into you, you run into somebody, there's an accident at sea. The most important thing that will be looked at in the assessment of the accident is, did you have a proper lookout? Because without a lookout, collisions are almost unavoidable. So every vessel shall have at all times maintain a proper lookout by sight and hearing. Let me break this down for you with the next slide, because I've accentuated the most important features of the rule. It says shall. You don't have, this is not optional. This is the most important part of the whole coal regs. You must keep a proper lookout.
Does that mean two people? Or?
No, if you're by yourself, it means you, but you have to, as Frank said, you're responsible for 360 degrees. So, for example, if you're gonna make a turn, don't assume that there's nobody coming up on your starboard side if you're turning to the right. Just make it a point to always look before you turn your boat. Especially, well, if you're in a sailboat, you have a little more time, but if you're in a powerboat, things happen really quickly. So you wanna make sure that and it's not just sight, it's hearing too. Sometimes you'll hear things that you won't see. So it says, by sight and hearing, and by all available means. So, there's no room for error here. You have to use every possible means available to you to make sure that you have that proper lookout. If you have more than one person on board, assign that other person the responsibility to help you with the lookout. If you're driving the helm, we do this on our Coast Guard missions. Not only do we do that pre-brief that Frank described, we do it in a little more detail. We assess a lot of things, but we also immediately assign lookouts. Somebody has a stern lookout, somebody has forward, even if there's somebody at the helm. And if we have enough people, we'll assign people to look starboard and port, just to make sure we've got everything covered. And it's depending on the prevailing circumstances and conditions. It doesn't matter what the conditions are. You're always required to do this, even if you have low visibility, and especially if you have low visibility, so as to make a full appraisal of the situation and the risk of collision. Most important, and the risk of collision. So I don't see how more comprehensive they could have written this rule. I mean, it covered. You have no choice. You must do. You can't say, oh, you know what? I had a problem with the bilge pump, and I wanted to go check on it, and I just didn't. That's no excuse. You've got to stop your boat. If you're by yourself and you need to leave the helm, you got to stop your boat. You just don't assume that there's some exception to the rule. There is no exception to this rule. Now, they couldn't have staged this better to illustrate that this is a real accident. This happened right out here in Herrington Bay. Okay, so the sailboat had the right of way, right? And the charter captain was probably had his autopilot on. Autopilots, I've had autopilots, and I love autopilots, especially if you're on long cruises. You're out in the ocean and you're on a long cruise. There's nothing like autopilot. But you have to still maintain a lookout. So what happened here was the charter captain wasn't paying attention. He might have had his autopilot on, and he might have turned around to deal with something that was going on board. The sailor thought, well, I have the right of way, I'm a sailboat, right? And we'll get into that a little bit in the next slide or two. And so he just kept going. And you see what happened. Now, who's at fault here? Both boats. Both of them are at fault. Because if the sailor kept a proper lookout, he could have avoided that collision, even though we had the right of way. The right of way is only good if the other person observes the rule and gets out of your way. So now in this situation, if these were two power boats, because of the way in which this power boat struck the sailboat, he was on your starboard side, so he had the right of way if it were two power boats. But that's beside the point. It wouldn't have mattered if they were both power boats, because this collision should not have happened. Either boat had the obligation to avoid the collision, regardless of who had the right of way. And that's just like, people just don't understand how important that is. And if you're out on the bay, I'm sure many of you have experienced this. If you're going from the west shore to the east shore, and I make this point whenever we're teaching the Maryland Boating Safety course. If you have the right of way when you're crossing from east to west, west to east. So I do that. I'm out on the bay all the time. I'm doing this. Maybe I'm going over to Poplar Island. Maybe I'm going up Eastern Bay. Maybe I'm going down to the Choptank River. I'm eastbound. Any boat coming south on the channel, especially if it's a boat of any size, cabin cruisers are the most notorious violators of this. They've got their autopilot on. They're on a cruise. They're coming down the bay, and they're relaxing. They're chatting. They have their autopilot on. They're not paying attention. They will almost never. I mean, it's almost, you can almost count on them not yielding the right of way. If I'm going across the bay, I have the right of way, even though they're coming down the channel, that I just assume that they're not going to observe the rule. And so I go behind them. Sometimes if I'm really PO'd about it, I'll get on the radio on 16 and I'll remind the captain, you know, white cabin cruiser going south at Bloody Point light, you know, you have to yield the right of way. The boat's coming on your starboard. I mean, it doesn't do any good. It makes me feel better. But you just have to use your common sense and avoid the problem. Don't keep pushing it and see, is he going to notice me? Is he going to notice me? Is he going to notice me? And then you get in a situation where you may have not be able to do the proper last minute adjustments. So.
Yeah, and I'll just point out, you can tell there were no last minute adjustments because it's a T-boat, right? Like this sailboat was just dug into his right of way, didn't even try to fall off and at least make this a starboard quarter collision. Just a straight T-bone, not moving. And fortunately nobody died or was hurt, just a lot of boat damage. But the other thing for sailboats is we don't have horns, so always recommend in your little cup holders to have your air horn there, because that might have been the last clear chance to avoid a collision.
Oh, yeah, that reminds me. I've had all these things happen to me, but I was over on Kent Island, and I was over in Naps Narrows, and my daughter was with me, one of my daughters, and I was in a little cove that has a gas pump, and I was fueling up, and I'm coming out of this cove. In this cove, it's right before the bridge. It's on the west side of the bridge, and it's a great place to fuel up because they have good fuel prices. But there's also a lot of charter boats that are docked in there, and she and I are coming out. We're not going very quick. We're just motoring along at idle speed, and this big, long wooden charter boat, crabber, comes around through the bridge, and he's used to pulling into his slip. And he's up. If you notice in those boats, oftentimes they have a little cabin with a steering wheel helm, but they're usually operating from the stern helm. And so he is over. His stern helm is on the port side, and he's running his long boat. This boat was 40 feet at least, and he can't see past that cabin. So I'm coming out, and he's really moving quickly, and he's coming in at quite a clip, and he just comes around the corner, and I see him, and I immediately know that he is not seeing me because of that cabin. So I start blasting on my horn, and I put my engines in reverse because and that's my duty now to try to avoid getting hit. If I didn't do that and he hit me, not only would I have lost the boat and possibly my daughter and me, but because he was really moving, and this was a big, heavy clunker of a boat. But he just didn't see us, and when I did everything I could, including the horn, and the horn's what saved us, because as soon as he heard my horn, he pulled back, and he was very apologetic. But I mean, it could have been a catastrophe. So the horn in that situation, the horn was, really the most important thing that we had on board.
So on the horn, is it 3 blasts, 5 blasts, 1 blast?
It's 5 blasts. The horn is 5 blasts means danger, but you can blow it 10 times. I kept my pushing that button until he woke up. I mean, five or more blasts is the warning. So yeah. So in 3 blasts, it means you're going astern. 1 blast means I'm passing you on your starboard side. 2 blasts means we're passing port to port. 3 blasts means going astern. So here's the deal. Assign a crew member, and if you're by yourself, you're the responsible party to be your proper lookout. It's the whole circle around your boat. The danger quadrant is your starboard. Okay, so what I like to do, Paul has another technique for doing this. What I like to do is tell people, use your right hand, straight ahead and all the way over to the right. That's the most dangerous part. That everybody that's coming at you from that angle has the right of way. If you remember that, then you're going to be in good shape to avoid having an accident with the boat that has the right of way. So
They're coming at you this way, you're saying?
yes, they're coming. He's showing us that you're coming at you're going straight ahead, and he's coming at you from anywhere on your starboard, anywhere from head on to the right. Any boat in that quadrant has the right of way. And if it's at night, you'll see a green light. So that's why the green is always on your port side, because that's giving the signal to another boat that sees you. At night, they're gonna see a green light. And if they don't see a red light, just a green light, then they know that you have the right of way. Green meaning go. And if you see a red light, then that means that boat is coming at you on your port side, and you have the right of way. Or that means if you see his red light. But that's only good if he observes the rule. And in that situation, by the way, your obligation, if you're the boat that doesn't have the right of way, so if I'm the guy who's looking this way and somebody's coming across my bow, I have the duty to get out of their way. And the way I do that is not by turning to the left to port. I want to turn to starboard. Because if you turn to port, that boat may or may not know what you're doing, and you also will be possibly entering into his path by going to port. You want to always go to starboard in that situation, because then, and you want to do it in a way that the other boat recognizes you've seen him and you're observing the rules. You're going to go behind him, so because he should be looking out for that too. He should be observing which direction you turn. If you turn to port, then he's got a problem. He's got to make sure that your turn to port is so sharp that you're not going to cross his path. Because sometimes when you see somebody on that starboard quarter, they could be coming on an angle that you can't judge the angles that well. So you want to make sure that you make a full turn to starboard to go behind that boat. And then that captain knows that you've got to go behind him. He's got the right of way. And duty to avoid a collision. Now this is something that a lot of people don't realize. If you have radar on your boat, under the rules, it's spelled out in, I think it's rule 6 or 7, you have to have that radar operating. That's another available tool for avoiding collision. If you don't have radar, or if your radar is broken, that's an excuse. But if you have radar on your boat and you're in a collision and your radar wasn't operating, then you may have a liability issue. You may share the fault, or you may be partly responsible, you may be fully responsible, depending on all of the circumstances of the collision. So I try to tell people that when I do boat inspections is, if you got radar, make sure you put it on. And again, fault and liability, these are things that are determined by all of the circumstances, and radar, the complicating element if you have it and not using it. And constant bearing and decreasing range. This is such a useful tool if you're operating a boat in traffic. There's a lot of boats out there. I use it all the time. I know Paul and I were talking about this yesterday. He uses it as well. So if let's say there's a mile or two between me and another boat that's moving in any direction. Let's say it's coming this way or it's coming this way. If I have radar, of course, I can make a quick calculation as to whether or not there's any risk of us colliding. But if I don't, or even if I do, if I'm just at the helm, I don't need to necessarily use the radar to make this determination. If I see a boat, let's say I'm going again over to Poplar Island, and then there's a boat coming north on the main channel, and I want to find out what the risk of collision is for us, then I'm going to make this calculation. If I have a constant bearing with that boat, and the way I determine that is, say, this camera stand here, let's just say that this is the other vessel, and I'm moving, and now I look at that vessel, and then if I can see the shoreline, and in the bay most of the time, and clear weather, you can see the shoreline. If there's a tree or a house or even a bump in the hillside over there, I'll line that boat up with that bump, And if I'm moving towards that, and I'm going in the same direction, and he's going in the same direction, if that bump is still in line with that boat, so in other words, I'm looking at that boat and at the object behind it, maybe it's a buoy. If that object behind that boat and me stay in the same angle, then we're in a constant bearing. It's easy to determine. Just look at something past the vessel you're worried about. And if you find that thing is still in the same place, same orientation, vis-a-vis your boat, then you're on a constant bearing. And as you get closer, as your range diminishes, you're going to collide, or you're going to come very close. So simple rule it's easy to do. I just pick something up on the shoreline, and I can decide whether our speeds are such that there's any risk of us getting near each other. And here's just another illustration of it. Not a very clear one, obviously. I don't know why that's showing up so blurry, but it's not blurry on my screen. Anyway, you get the idea. So, just going to touch on the hierarchy. For those of you who aren't familiar with the way a hierarchy works, a boat that has the most hierarchy is a boat that's not under command. In other words, it's afloat. Its power source is not working. Whatever the mast fell over and the sailboat can't move. That's not under command. Everybody has to avoid that boat. The next one is restricted as a boat to maneuver, and that is any kind of large vessel that, like the vessels that are coming up the channel with all the cars or the boxes and the freighters. They are restricted in their ability to maneuver. They always have the right of way over everything after that. Constrained by draft, it sort of means the same thing. It means that they have to stay in the channel because of their depth, the amount of water they need. And that's only in the international rules. I know there's another misspelling here, sorry about that. I look at these slides so many times I don't even see the misspellings. So the rules are broken down into inland rules and international rules. And the book breaks them out pretty clearly. The way it works is one side of the page is international rules, the other side is inland rules. Inland means you're inside the line of demarcation. Everybody, you know what the line of demarcation is on a chart? So every chart that covers the coastal waters will have a line drawn on the chart wherever the inlet reaches the ocean. So like if you go down the bottom of the bay at Smith Point, if you look at your chart and you look at Smith Point, you're gonna see a line drawn all the way across from shore to shore. That's the line of demarcation. And it's on every chart that is coastal. And it means that when you cross the line of demarcation, you are going from inland waters and inland rules to international rules. They're often very similar, but not always. Pardon?
It's not 3 miles off the coast.
No. The line of demarcation that's territorial waters. The line of demarcation is always a separation between inland waters and coastal waters, offshore waters. And so the rules change a little bit there. It's significant in several respects. For example, tugboats have different lading configurations if they're offshore or international or they're in inland waters. And there are other rules too that change. For example, very seldom do we use these rules, but if you're going to pass somebody on your starboard or your port and you use your horn blasts, your whistles, they call it. If you use a whistle, let's say you use one whistle, and captains will refer to each other. I'll pass you one whistle, port to port. One whistle always means you're going to pass port to port. You're coming at each other directly. If it's in inland waters, it means my intention is to pass you port to port. If it's international waters, it means I am passing you port to port. Small differences, but they can matter if there's an accident. Oh, I'm sorry, let me finish this. So fishing vessels, this is not charter boats. These are big commercial fishing boats that are dragging nets and stuff. So they're in the hierarchy, they come after restricted mobility maneuver. And then sailing vessels, we all know, are ahead of power vessels, and power vessels are ahead of seaplanes. Seaplanes are at the bottom of the list. And if you want a mnemonic for this, which I always remember this from my captain's course, new reels catch fish, so purchase some. You can remember that, then you'll always know what the hierarchy is, okay? New reels catch fish, so purchase some. And you can see why I believe, thanks to Paul, I made those letters red so we can stand out. So, here are the three considerations. When you're meeting head on, nobody has the right of way. The preferred course is to go to your right, to your starboard. So, two boats meeting head on, go to starboard, and the other boat should follow suit. If for some reason you go to starboard and he goes to starboard, avoid the collision. Make the turn out of his way. Crossing situations, the rules are starboard has the right of way. Overtaking, this is a unique rule all by itself, which changes every other rule, okay? Any vessel overtaking another vessel is the giveaway vessel. So, you have the stand-on vessel, which is the vessel that has the right of way, and you have the giveaway vessel, which is the vessel that has to yield. Any boat that's overtaking you, so you're out in your power boat and a sailboat, so you're just putting along and this sailboat's got a good breeze. If that sailboat is passing you, all of a sudden, you, the power boat, are the stand-on vessel, and the sailboat is the giveaway vessel now. That's the only circumstance between a powerboat and a sailboat when the sailboat doesn't have the right of way, when it's overtaken. And why is that? Well, it's because logic is the sailboat has more maneuverability to avoid collision if it's coming up behind you than in any other angle. And if it's overtaking you, your obligation is to hold course and speed. Whenever everybody's overtaking you and you know they're overtaking you, your duty is hold course and speed until they safely pass you.
Or slow down.
Well, you slow down, then you might throw off the other captain. The question is, what about slowing down? I mean, slowing down might work in certain circumstances, but the rule is we maintain course and speed. That's written in the rules. If you're being overtaken, and let's just say, for example, which rarely happens, that somebody actually gives you the signal that they're overtaking you by using their horn, one blast or two blasts. You'll never see that on the bay. But anyway, that's technically what you're supposed to do. If you hear that, then you maintain course and speed. If you hear one blast, you know they're coming on your starboard side. If you hear two blasts, they're coming on your port side. When I said one whistle, that's when you're heading head on, port to port. But if they're coming behind you and there's one whistle, that means you expect to see them over here on your starboard side. If it's two whistles, then you expect to see them on your port side. Meaning they're overtaking you on their starboard side. The two whistles applies to the starboard side. I don't want to confuse it. Pardon me?
Which way should they overtake?
Either way, it's up to them. That's fine. As long as,
Based on circumstances of the distance you have and the width of the channel that you're operating.
yeah. Don't forget your mic. Yes. So right. It may be that they have no room on one side or the other, and you'll be able to figure that out too if you're like say if you're coming in a channel or like you're coming through the Chesapeake Delaware Canal. There's only one way somebody's going to be able to pass you, and that's on your port side.
Can I ask a question about, do those rules stay in effect when you're in a race situation?
No.
What I'm specifically, hypothetically, if you were in a boat overtaking another boat, and that boat intentionally changed course to prevent you from overtaking them, but it's a race, does that rule still apply, or is it like not?
Okay. So the question is whether or not does this rule apply in a situation where there's, like, say, a sailboat race, and somebody is overtaking you in the race, can you cut them off? Well, in the sailboat races, if you're going to cause an accident, yeah, then the rules apply. I mean, you can't cause an accident, but if you're in a race you can call starboard if you're crossing in a crossing situation. If it's an overtaking situation, I don't know that it would be unfair for you in that situation to use a maneuver that might advantage you and disadvantage the other boat that's trying to pass you. But I think that the safe answer is, if the boat is overtaking you and you're going to cause a collision, even in a sailboat race, you have the duty to avoid that. Under all circumstances, that is the pervasive rule. You must avoid collision. That's the whole purpose of every one of those rules, is avoiding collision.
To be clear, we were the overtaking boat, not the boat.
Right. Yeah, so, but that's because you were going so fast that you were able to overtake that other boat, and you're clearly going to win that race. And that's important. But as long as it doesn't result in an accident, you're fine. Now, I've been in sailboat races where somebody calls starboard and the other boat doesn't hear them or doesn't want to hear them, and there's a collision. Well, guess who's responsible for that? The boat that didn't hear starboard. That's So now this illustration serves a couple of purposes, but what the thing I wanted to point out in this illustration is that you're considered to be overtaking another boat if you're 22.5 degrees from the beam of the boat. So in other words, and your stern light, if this is at night, this is very evident at night. Your stern light will shine on that angle, okay, 22.5 degrees abaft the beam. So the beam coming across the center, 22.5 degrees abaft, behind the beam on either side, is where that light can be seen if you're overtaking somebody. So if you're coming up at night upon a boat and you see only the white light, you are within that range. You are overtaking that boat. If you come up on a boat and you see a white light and a green light, then you're not abaft, you're not overtaking, you're crossing. So this illustrates that situation where you're crossing if you can see the red light or the blue or the green light and the white light. If you only see a white light, then you are overtaking. So at night, those are the way you can. That's the way in which you can decipher your duty in that circumstance. You are therefore the giveaway vessel if you are in that range of the white light without seeing any of the running lights. Okay.
Yeah, we'll just go back to that real quick. I find this one to be helpful, especially when we're in the harbor, leaving Herrington Harbour. So you know how we have that junctional buoy, there's the Rockhold Creek and the Tracy's Creek, and you're coming out and another boat's coming out and you might not be at the helm. Go back one slide, Joe. So instead of the boat being up there, let's imagine it's here and this guy's coming out of the Rockhold Creek and I'm coming out of the Tracy's Landing Creek, right? And so who has the right of way? So for me, the way I always learned it was the port side boat gives way. It's just, again, that was just 10 years ago when I did the course, that's the phrase that stuck. And it matches up with what Joe was saying. So I always ask myself, if I'm the port side boat, so in this case, if I'm here, I'm on his port side, so I'm required to give way. So when you're coming out and the charter boats come in, of course they have the right of way because they're a charter boat, but if they're not, they don't have the right of way, they just...
He's being facetious. Yeah.
So the other way to do it, which was what Captain... Sorry. Sorry.
The other one has to.
In this scenario?
Yeah, the one you're holding.
The one I'm holding.
Yeah.
Yeah, the port side boat. So if I'm
He's
coming
asking who has the right of way.
If I'm coming up, just the two helmsmen just need to ask themselves, who's the port side boat? So this boat is looking at me, he's looking at my port side. So he's required to yield. He's the giveaway vessel. I'm stand on. That doesn't always happen in Chesapeake Bay. But I just want to also reiterate another way to think about it, which is what Captain Westbrook suggested at the seamanship session, if you were there for that, which was the analogy to the traffic lights. So another way to do it is if I'm here and I forget port side boat gets way, or I forget what Joe said about everything to the starboard side, you can just ask yourself which traffic light you're seeing. You'd have to reconstruct it if it was daytime. But if I'm here and I'm looking at that boat and I know which side red and green are on, then I could say green is go. I'm looking at their starboard side. I know that would be a green light if it were nighttime. And that's just another way, versus the opposite is true. If I'm this boat and we're coming with a constant bearing and decreasing range, I can sort of reconstruct that's the port side, it's a red light, I need to give way. Just other ways to sort of remember this very important collision avoidance rule.
When you are leaving between the two piers, like right out here, do those rules still apply, or does the boat that's leaving between the two piers is always the boat that has to move down?
You mean like in the fairways, like in the lanes? Yeah.
What was the question?
The question is if you're exiting your slip and you're in your lane, do the rules apply? Yes, they do.
They do.
They do.
So if the boat's approaching
Sure.
from this side and I'm pulling out of the fairway, they have to give.
Yeah, now again, that's a sort of a high-risk collision scenario, so I would say both parties should try to yield and make it clear, but the rules apply, yes.
And under the rules, you're supposed to give one long blast
Correct.
if you're coming out of your fairway, out of your dock, so that those boats coming in either direction know that you're coming out. But I think discretion is the better part of valor there, and I would always yield to the traffic that's already in the waterway if you're coming out of a slip, because it just makes more sense to do that than to try to say, okay, he's on my port side, I'm coming on his starboard side, I'm going to come out anyway. I wouldn't do that. So let me just, it's 11:25. We're going to, this course takes about 3 hours. We're going to go 2 hours and then break about 10 minutes or so, and then come back and finish up. We're running a little bit behind now.
Yeah,
but,
we can move quicker.
yeah. And Paul's going to do the man overboard,
Yeah.
and then we'll.
All right, so man overboard or person in the water is a really, I think, an important procedure to nail down. And I always say, it's not practice that makes perfect, it's perfect practice that makes perfect. We use that in medicine a lot. We use simulation a lot. And one thing that I enjoyed about being in the boat crew program in the auxiliary is that we practice man overboard. We use this guy named Oscar. He's heavy, he goes in the water, he gets even heavier, and it helps mimic what it's like to retrieve a person. So here's our example. It's a sunny day in June, captain of a 34-foot sailing vessel, that would be me, 1 mile off Herring Bay in 10 knots of wind. Seas are relatively calm at 1 foot. We're under sail. The captain trips on a sheet line and falls overboard, and he's not wearing a PFD. So what do you need to do in that situation? Whoops. All right. So we need a few things. We need knowledge, we need skills, we need crew, and we need equipment. And it's very hard to successfully retrieve a person in the water if you don't have all four. So this is also about risk mitigation. So if I'm single-handing my sailboat, which I like to do a lot, I have to think about how I'm going to mitigate that risk. So I can tether myself to the helm. I can lay out my jack lines and walk the deck with that, or I can trail a floating line behind me. It's sort of an old school technique. I've used it. I've never actually self-rescued with it, but I do sometimes deploy it. Here in these kind of settings is where we gain the knowledge, but the skill is acquired with practice. So I really encourage you, even on a calm day, to just throw a floaty out. I've done this a few times with my kids. They hate it, and I'll just yell, "Man overboard," and they freak out, and one comes running up from the cabin, and and then we go through our procedure. Most of your equipment is going to underperform if you don't use it, if you are not familiar with it. Even your chart plotter, press that man overboard button. You can clear it. It's not going to call the Coast Guard. It's not a distress signal. It's just a marker. So get familiar with your equipment because it's all there and it's sitting idle. And if we don't use it in simulation, then we don't gain the skill. In the pre-departure checklist, it's important to sort of think about your crew and acknowledge, who has the strength to retrieve somebody, or who is most likely to fall overboard, and think about how you're going to use those people in different assignments. Who's more likely to be at the helm versus walking out on the foredeck in choppy seas. And you can kind of talk through that. So I organize the man overboard equipment in 3 ways: flotation, markers, and recovery. The flotation, well, it doesn't show up. So the horseshoe is the common aid to flotation. That's usually just sitting in a little saddle there, so it's not tethered, it doesn't have to be unsecured, it's always just sitting there, easy to deploy. That's how it should be. So if you have yours secured in another way, don't, and it's not going to fly away. Then we've got markers. Markers are really important. So I put up 2, the Dan buoy and the fixed pole. And so I use this fixed pole one. The Dan buoy is sort of on my wish list. It's coming eventually. I just, have to pace out all the purchases. But that's a really nice one. It's inflatable. It's goes up about 8 feet or 6 feet, and it's got an 8-foot tail, as well as a strobe at the top. And so that usually sits on your stern rail, and it's easily deployed, especially in choppy seas. There's sea story after sea story of people not being visible in as little as 2 feet of chop. The pole I like just because it's fail-safe and it works. I just drop it into my fishing pole cylinder and it's good to go. There's other flotation equipment like the rescue stick, which is a common one for, like DNR will carry those if they're on the dock because they're throwable. And you can get them out a good 100 feet with a good throw. So flotation and markers are the most common, but recovery, I would say, is the one that I see the least when I do vessel exams. And the life sling is the most affordable, easiest one. The challenge with that is hoisting. So the most common technique is to deploy the life sling and then circle the victim until it sort of catches their line and they can grab the line or the sling and put the sling on. But getting them out of the water is more challenging for power boaters because you don't have the benefit of a boom or a hoisting technique with a winch. So think about that. Fortunately, you have more of a likelihood of a swim platform on a power boat, so you're closer to the water, and that's going to be your primary. But it does take a lot of effort to bring somebody on board, usually 2 people. And so when we do it in the Coast Guard, we've got one person handling the main recovery, and then that person is held by the person behind them. So think about how common is a difficult retrieval, especially in choppy seas. So I said use the man overboard button and get familiar with that to mark your spot on the chart. And the most important thing is for a spotter. Again, difficult if there's only 2 people, but you ideally would want that one person to be the spotter. And so that's something that we review in our pre-departure checklist, is that we will always have a spotter, and it's the person who sees them go in the water first is the one who maintains a visualization, pointing, and you see his hand is up because he's giving the helmsman coordinates. So he's saying 50 yards off the port quarter, 50 yards off the port bow, and keeps giving the helmsman information. And we often use, if we have enough crew, a relay, so that there's the spotter is not shouting, he's speaking to the person next to him, and then that person can direct their voice, because you know how boating is. It's hard to hear, and so if I'm projecting my voice directly at Frank, it's better than the spotter who's trying to maintain their purpose of yelling in the opposite direction. Okay, so throwing a life ring and anything that floats would be first and foremost. I always say the first question that you have to ask is if that person is wearing flotation and if that flotation is working. Did the PFD deploy? Did the inflatable deploy? If a child's wearing a child vest, it'd stay on when they hit the water, which can often slip, especially if they're not wearing a strap through their legs. And so they're going to need flotation right away. You know, we gave a cold water course if you were here for that. We are in the shoulder season, so it might be, 70 degrees tomorrow, but the water temperature is very cold. And so that may cause them to panic.
Well, can I just,
Yeah.
if you're gonna be throwing a throwable, either a life ring or cushion, you throw it like a frisbee, okay? Not overhead, like a frisbee. You can get more distance with it, and you can be more accurate for the person.
Yeah, these are great cushions to sit on right at the helm in addition to the sling, so they serve two purposes. Okay, so we talked about somebody spotting and then throwing and then using your recovery system. Stopping the boat, so let's talk about that. You're underway, you're sailing, and somebody falls in the water. What would you do? Would you turn your engine on, drop your sails? Go ahead, sir.
What I tell my wife to do is heave to,
Yeah.
is the first thing to do. Then turn on the engine, and then come and recover.
Right. Yeah, that's what I would do as well. And if you're not familiar with heaving to, it's probably one of the most important ways to arrest the forward motion of a sailboat almost immediately with nothing more to do but turn the other way, backfill the head sail, and then bring your rudder around to counteract the force of the mainsail, and you basically stop. And it's a great heavy weather tactic, but it's a great way to stop the boat first so that you don't continue to lengthen the distance between you and the victim. Get your engine on, and then as you come around, and you could drop your main and furl your head sail.
Have you ever seen, if it's a single person, the engine on the boat, on diesel, shut off? Because on motorboats, you can have those little things that fall off, turns the engine on.
The kill switch.
Yeah, we don't have that
No,
on so the boat can keep.
the boat can keep going. Yeah. Yeah.
Has to be-
They
yeah.
do have it. The wood black bulge. It's only the diesel and the tavern does
You have it in one way?
it. If you had a open cockpit diesel, then it would need to have a cutoff switch.
Yeah, depending on the year it's manufactured.
Correct.
Yeah,
Well,
why
yeah,
don't
I mean, you don't seal
you
them,
keep that
but the
question
issue is
with
not
the
the diesel.
discussion with you.
Yeah.
It is open cockpit or closed cockpit.
Right, so the question is about a kill switch, which is an important safety feature, especially on modern boats. The fatality that Joe mentioned earlier did not have a kill switch. That too, potentially could have saved his life. But
Can I say one
yeah,
thing?
And
I do a fair amount of vessel inspections, and one of the most common violations you see is that, particularly on a power boat, is that the throw cushion is anywhere. It's not immediately accessible. And it's required that one of your flotation devices be a throw cushion. And the reason for that is that if somebody goes overboard, the very first thing you want to do is grab that cushion and throw it, because it's going to be visible and mark where that individual is. And I can't tell you how many times you inspect a boat,
me too.
and that throw cushion is under a seat, or nobody knows where it is.
Yeah, and if you get stopped, Doug's making the point that the throw cushion has to be on the deck, has to be readily accessible on the deck. If you get stopped and you're inspected, and you have a guy, somebody who really wants to hold you to the line, you'll get a ticket for not having that out. Even you can have a dozen of them. If there's not one on the deck there where a crew member can grab it and throw it, you're in violation. And then again, you're taking a risk, because once that person falls in the water, they're a melon. Now, if you imagine a floating melon in the water, you're going to lose sight of that, especially if there's a chop. You're going to lose sight of that head almost right away. So you throw that cushion in, and you throw anything else you've got in. As Paul said, if you have a little cooler that floats, throw that in. Throw as much stuff in that water as possible, so that spotter can, at least if they lose track of the head, they can see the junk that you threw in the water. And that person never takes, as Paul said, I always use my arm. You never take your eye off of that spot where that person went in the water, because all you need to do is turn away once, and then you try to find it again, and you're in trouble. So you call out your directions to the helmsman, but keep your eye on the water. And as they say, throw anything in that'll float.
Yeah. Yeah, and so the procedure is going to vary depending on the conditions. So in the standard approach is to stop the boat downwind or down current and let the victim drift towards the boat so that the boat doesn't drift towards the victim and injure them. I think in practice that's much more important in choppy conditions. So you just have to use your judgment about how you're going to approach what makes the most sense. In the vignette that I set up, probably doesn't matter, and once you've got the life sling out and the victim attaches themselves into the sling, you can just stop the boat and yield, and ring them in. An important safety point is to kill the engine when you're retrieving. So that's when I'm pulling Joe and we're about this close. That would be a good time to make sure that the engine's off. At that point, you don't need it. Some would say to just leave the engine on and put it in neutral. Again, people do things when they're panicked, and if it feels like an unsafe situation, they may throw the engine into gear. So think about that. I probably would leave it in neutral, but the recommendation, especially for power boats, is to kill the engine.
And in a sailboat, often the throttle is in the cockpit somewhere, and it's a lever. And if you're running around trying to get material to help you hoist that person aboard, you can easily kick that throttle, and then you're back in gear. So my personal opinion is, turn it off, unless you're really confident that you can leave it on without causing an issue.
Yeah, and then the last thing is communicating with the crew how you're going to extract the victim from the water. Just because they're in the life sling and they're close to the boat, they're still in danger. They're still in danger of a collision, and they're still in danger of not being able to be hoisted. So think about that. Try to practice it, even if you're simulating with lighter weights, about how you might attach yourself to the transom if you're going out onto your swim platform. Practice. See what makes sense. I have a snatch block and a hoisting 3-to-1 advantage pulley system. It's just in a bag. It's easily accessible. And I know that I can attach that to the outside of my boom and bring any victim, no matter the weight, on board. All right, so Mayday. Is a man overboard on Mayday? Well, it depends. If it's at night, if you know the victim has been injured, like that you witnessed somebody get hit by a boom and go overboard, or you have no visualization, those are Maydays, right? Those are imminent threats to life. You can always call it off. But if it's at night, or you know the victim's injured day or night, or you have no visualization day or night, those are Maydays. You need assistance. I had one day I was coming out and my kids were on the deck, and my daughter with her friend all the way at the bow pulpit. I've been going along, and all of a sudden everybody looks back at me and doesn't say anything, but they're all looking at me. Like, what? Via slipped off the side rail. My daughter's name is Livia, and suddenly I don't see my daughter. Like, moment of shock. But as I they're not looking out in the water. They're looking straight down, and then I see her little knuckles holding onto the gunnel. So she was having fun with her toe as the wave was splashing right at the bow, trying to reach in there, and whoop, she slipped in, caught the stanchion, and it was hanging from the gunnel. So it's a nice day. We're making like 2 knots and 5 knots of wind. So I hit the autopilot. I walk out there. How you doing? She's like, pull me up, pull me up. I was like, I just had back surgery. Get yourself up. So I was like, shimmy all the way to the cockpit. So she slides along the gunnel all the way to the cockpit, and then we help her come over the transom rail, the stern rails. So, you have to sort of use your judgment as to what is an emergency, what you think you need assistance with. If it's a calm day, you probably can just stop your boat, try to keep everyone calm. We use the dive that we as a family, scuba dive, and so, we use when you get in the water and you tap your head to say, I'm good to go. So if somebody falls in the water, we all know as a family to tap our heads to communicate that I'm not hurt, I'm okay. Again, just to sort of give some information to the people on the boat. Because if they don't tap their head, then I might take more aggressive measures.
2 questions.
Yeah.
Is the life ring preferable to a cushion for recovery?
A life ring, is a life ring equivalent to a cushion?
Yeah,
Yes.
which is preferable?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the ring is hard to get into if you're in an inflated PFD. If you go in the water with an inflatable and it inflates, you're going to have a heck of a time getting into a ring. You probably won't. And we don't want you to sort of sacrifice your inflatable for the ring. So the nice thing about the sling is it can get wide enough to get around you. The other thing to remind you is it's very difficult to get into a PFD in the water. So if you went in the water and I tossed you a PFD, good luck getting that. And if you don't believe me, do it in your pool or friend's pool. Practice that. Jump in the water. And again, getting to know your equipment, especially if you have a 3-year-old cylinder, that's a good time to jump in the pool. So that you get the experience of how long does it take to deploy, what does it feel like on my neck, does it ride up and I feel like I'm like stuck between it? Get to know your equipment, use the old cylinders in a simulated fashion, and also kind of get a sense of how tight they need to be. This is the vest that I use by Mustang. It's one of their newer ones called the Chimera. I like it because it's a suspender style. I just have this thing about my neck, I don't like it. So I have my offshore coastal inflatable because it's got the rings so that I could tether. This is more of a recreational vest, but it's both inherent foam for flotation and it's got a CO2 cartridge for inflation. So I've got both, hence the name Chimera, and then I leave my personal locator beacon on, as well as my knife and a few things here. It's a nice vest.
So this beacon comes on when this thing hits the water?
No, these are not, the personal locator beacon doesn't automatically trigger like the EPIRB for your boat does. They both use satellite to signal distress, but a personal locator beacon requires you to lift the antenna and then hold the button down and activate stuff.
Boy, if you can afford one of these things, this is really worth the investment. They used to be a couple $100, now they're more like $400. But you can be anywhere in the world, and you don't have to be a boater. You can be a hiker. And this thing is the most valuable piece of equipment. As a long story I could tell you, we're not running out of time, but about 6 guys that were very experienced fishermen, and they were out off of Virginia Beach, about 13 miles. They didn't tell anybody where they were going. They didn't file a float plan. There was a storm, and the only thing that saved them, because the boat sank so quickly because of the circumstances, that one of the fellas had in his dive bag a PLB, personal locator beacon, and if they hadn't had that, they wouldn't have been found probably till the next morning. They might have all been dead from hypothermia because a storm came in that night. And this is what saved them. Coast Guard was able to pick them up in 2 hours. They had a helicopter. We're always doing training, so there was a helicopter out of Elizabeth City. It was training, and they went and got him. Are you finished?
Any questions on man before we move on? Yes, sir, in the back.
I was just wondering about where you said you should pull up next to the PIW downwind or down current. And I was just wondering about, is that true for both motorboats and sailboats?
Yes.
And I only ask because I took a class one time where they said you should dump your sailboat upwind and it will push the boat gently towards the victim.
Yeah, the question is whether or not you should be upwind of the victim in the water, this person in the water, we call it PIW, or downwind of them.
Yeah.
Our recommendation is to be downwind of them, because if you can't control the boat once it's being blown towards the victim. And the worst thing you want to do is if especially if that person is having trouble, is to have the boat hit them or run over them. Not run over them because the power's on, just simply you could run over them because the boat's being pushed by the wind or the current. So you want to be upwind or up current from the victim is usually the best circumstance. But again, a captain may make a different decision depending on the circumstances. But the rule that we use in the Coast Guard is you want to be downwind or down current of the victim so that you don't overrun them when you're trying to save them. You have much more control of the boat. You know, when you're pulling into a dock, you have much more control of your docking situation when you're going upwind or up current than you do the other way around. Because the other way around, if the wind is pushing you or if you get a gust, you're going to get pushed into the dock and you don't have any way of stopping yourself. So I think we're really running short of time. I'm going to just touch on So I put this slide in there because this is so important. People don't realize when you have a person in the water like that, and you don't, people assume that drowning victims look like they do on TV or in the movies. You know, they're shouting and they're waving. They may do that, and may not do that at all, but they may do that initially when they're in trouble. You may or may not see it. But if you see somebody in the water and they have their head tilted back, they're not making any motion at all, or maybe they look like they're climbing a ladder, or maybe if they have, I don't have hair, but if you have hair, sometimes it can be in front of your eyes, and they're not pushing it out of the way. These are all signs, and they're gasping. Another example. These are all signs of a person drowning, and they're seconds away from losing their life. So a lot of parents, unfortunately, make this mistake if they see their kid out there. Well, he looks like he's fine, and he's not moving a lot, but he's just still in the water. Don't trust that. That is a sign of drowning. If you have a person in the water and they're showing this kind of, they're exhibiting this kind of behavior, they're drowning, and so your time is running short. Now, we tell people don't jump in the water to save a victim in the water, because now you have two victims. But if you're a good swimmer and you know some life-saving techniques, that might be something you can do. But what you should do always is take something with you that floats so that you can push it to the victim so that they can grab onto that rather than grab onto you. Even a small child is tremendously powerful when they're drowning. Their adrenaline is going, they can drown you. We learned, I remember when I got my life-saving badge, you approach a victim that's in the water that's drowning by going under the water, turning them around, grab their legs, turn them around, and climb up their body, and then put your arm over there so that they're facing away from you. Because if they can get their arms on you, you're going down. I mean, you have to be a very strong person not to have a drowning victim pull you under. So just remember that. Just a heads up about that. Frank is going to do fire. I'm trying to shorten our time because we're kind of. Oh, you've got your. Here you go.
Just a couple of primary causes of fire to go through. Electrical is probably most typical that happens on a boat. Battery issues, corrosion, any kind of bad connections that can cause a spark. Fuel related, leaks or spills. It's always good when you fuel off your boat, you check, you take the sniff test, make sure all the fumes have dissipated before you start the engine. Supposed to wait 4 minutes. That's the rule. And any fires that start outside the vessel. A lot of people now use these little hibachi grills, and you'll see them mounted on the railings of their boats, do their afternoon lunch or whatever. And those are hot coals. If that falls down and gets onto something that can start to burn, can start a fire on the boat itself. The method that we use when we talk about putting out a fire is the pass method. Let me see. Okay.
It doesn't look on the screen.
Is it not working?
For some reason. Okay. Pull pin, aim at the base of the fire, not at the top of the flames, right at the base. Squeeze the handle, and then sweep side to side. Okay? Very simple. Does anyone ever put out a fire? No? Okay. I had firefighting training when I was in the Coast Guard. And let me tell you, it can be unsettling if you go into a building or a compartment in a boat and try to put out a fire, even though it's in training. But if a fire does develop, and hopefully this doesn't happen to you, but I have seen them even here on the bay. And you have a nice little video we're going to show you quickly. But shut off all engines, generators, anything electrical. If you have a built-in fire extinguisher system on your boat activated, call for Mayday. Don't think that you're going to get this done and everything's going to be okay. A fire is going to damage your boat one way or another, to the point that you may not be able to get it underway again. Make sure everyone has their life jacket on. Okay? Not just that they're holding it. Tell them to put it on. Because if you have to go in the water, you want to do it quickly. If you have a life raft or dinghy, get it ready. As I mentioned before, we have built-in CO2 system, should activate it. Make sure that you give it enough time to ventilate the extinguisher, because the extinguishment that they use in these systems is very toxic. So you don't want to go into a compartment where this gas has been used. And as I said, sometimes you just have to abandon the boat. You don't have a choice. If the fire gets to a fuel tank, it's going to explode. Joe, can you put that little video that we had?
Yeah.
Now, this incident happened here on the bay
No, Florida.
a few months ago.
The clip I think we're going to show is from Florida.
Oh, Florida, excuse me. I know we've had some on the bay already.
It's a second for my computer to wind up getting us back to the one.
This is a diesel?
This is a gasoline.
It's a gasoline boat.
A deadly boat explosion in Florida. One person was killed and several others were seriously injured when a small boat exploded in Fort Lauderdale. The fire then spread into another vessel. Here's ABC's Perry Russom with the latest on the investigation.
Tonight, authorities in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, investigating the cause of this deadly boat explosion. Watch the video again, captured by an EarthCam webcam. The boat nearly splitting in half, ripping apart in a ball of fire, while docked at this marina Monday night.
We received multiple 911 calls from witnesses stating they saw a boat explode, there was a boat on fire, and there were people in the water.
Terrifying moments on the dock, people scrambling to safety. It appears one person on the boat was thrown into the water. The fire department says one person is dead, 5 others injured, 3 of them with traumatic injuries.
There's 2 boats on fire!
Newly released video from a firefighter's helmet shows crews racing to douse the growing flames in the water.
Keep it right there, keep it on the fire right there. Keep it on the fire right there.
Hours after the blast, you can see the remains of the blackened boat barely staying above water as fire and rescue crews work to get the situation under control. It's still not clear what sparked the explosion. Officials say they'll get a better idea once they lift what's left of the boat out of the water. And Rachel, officials confirm the person who was killed is a 41-year-old man from Quebec, Canada. Rachel?
Perry Russom with the latest on that investigation.
Okay, in this incident, they're actually fueling the boat. That's what happened. The fumes caught fire, the whole boat exploded. So you need to be very careful in fire situations like that.
Yeah, that was a good example of vapor sparking, because you saw the entire deck separated from the hull. That was a full vapor explosion, which is...
And most people don't do this, but the Coast Guard recommends that everybody on board, except the person that's filling the tank, leave the boat and get on the dock. You close all your windows and doors of any ports to try to keep any fumes from getting in the boat, and you make sure that the connection between the nozzle and the filling hole, that there's a connection there, so there's no static electricity that'll spark a fire. Those are simple precautions, but who thinks that this is going to happen at the fuel dock? I mean, it's just crazy.
But it has happened, unfortunately. Okay, you said abandonment is the last situation, but if the fire is starting and you can't control it, when you have, say, one fire extinguisher and you've used it up, you got to think what the next step is going to be. And an explosion is very likely to happen on the boat, especially in an engine fire, because the fuel tank can't be very far away. If you haven't shut the power off, that fuel pump is going to keep pumping fuel to that engine. It's going to keep fueling the fire. So you need to make a decision. So have everyone in the life jackets, you move them to the furthest distance away from the fire. If it's an engine fire, it's probably going to be the bow. And tell them to be prepared to go into the water. A couple other things to point out. The fire extinguishers that we have, they used to call them B1s. Now they're called 5Bs, I think.
Yeah, 5Bs, 10Bs, 5Bs, 10Bs, 20Bs.
They only have about 15 seconds. 15 seconds of extinguishing. And why we tell you when you put the fire out, slowly squeeze it. Don't hold it down because you go through that 15 seconds thing
50.
very fast, 15 seconds.
And aim at the base of the fire, always at the base.
Call for a mayday. If you're putting out the fire, have somebody else call for the mayday. But you want to try to get help there because, as I say, fires can get out of hand very quickly. And you don't want to be thinking, wow, we're going to have to abandon the boat. Whoops, I forgot to call for help.
Yeah, this is why the mayday call, for example, even in the situation that Paul's talking about with a man overboard, you have to make a decision whether or not to maybe you make a pan call, pon. If you make a pon call, at least the Coast Guard's alerted. Even if you don't think it's a mayday situation, if it turns into a mayday situation, they've already got you on their screen and they know there's a problem.
And you can always call back and say, hey, disregard my last message, we got it under control, we don't need the Coast Guard to come out and help us. But don't take that chance.
Yeah,
Call for help. That's what the Coast Guard is out there for. That's what your tax dollars are paying for. They're still reluctant to do it.
Now, the spear fishermen that were saved by having one of them having a PLB, they had no time to make a mayday call. They were spearfishing and got back on the boat. The boat flooded with water because of the way they tied it to this tower. There was a building C, and it kept coming over to the stern because you should never tie to a tower or a buoy. They did. Big mistake. And the boat was so unstable when they got aboard that they had about 25 seconds, according to one of them had a GoPro camera, to get whatever they needed, like life jackets, off the boats before it turned over. So and the boat was compromised anyway because of the water. So whether the radio would have worked if they had a chance to make the call, who knows? Because the engine wouldn't start. Chances are the whole electrical system was compromised by the water that the boat had taken on. So another reason why PLB is like it's the best last resort. But yeah, they didn't get a chance to make the mayday call.
Question.
And then
Actually, I just wanted to add one thing. More and more we're seeing propane stored on boats. And if it's done by the manufacturer, it's almost always stored, it will be stored in a cabinet with a drain hole because propane is heavier than air. But what we're seeing are people who have propane-powered outboards, or maybe they have portable grills that they brought along, and they stick those propane cylinders in an enclosed area, in the bilge, somewhere. And that's extremely dangerous because if it does leak, it doesn't vent out, it just sits in the bottom of whatever container it happens to be in. So just an extra warning about fire.
Right.
Doug is a member of the Coast Guard Auxiliary, so he has a knowledge of this stuff too. He's just not wearing his uniform today.
Are alcohol stoves still acceptable?
are alcohol stoves still acceptable?
They are.
I think they're still legal, but I think most people have gotten away from them. Yeah.
Used on the boat, but
There've been a lot of stove fires on sailboats, especially with alcohol. Yeah, I mean, if they're gimbaled stoves and everything, but all you need is a little bit of alcohol to spill on a hot plate or something, and you got a fire. So most of them are going to propane.
Question?
No, I was just going to say, we had an incident at Hartie's last year where a customer bought 2 of the Viking fiberglass propane tanks, and they both leaked in the bilge. And I believe they were going to trigger a recall on those, but just check. If you have the Viking fiberglass tanks, the guy was just being a little obsessive and hired a plumber to install it and found out it was leaking. And they removed it, they discharged all the propane, put another brand new one in there, and it was leaking as well. So
They gotta be in compartments with vents.
Yeah.
So, it has a hole in the bottom so that if it does leak, the gas goes out and it doesn't accumulate in the bilges.
But, yeah, it's a Viking fiberglass propane tanks.
Okay, let's, our next topic is capsizing. Probably more apt to happen on sailboats. Like if you're on a sailboat, you actually train and practice for it, especially on smaller sailboats. If it does happen, do not try to swim away. A lot of people think that they see the shoreline, excuse me, and that they can swim to it. Your distance perception is distorted when you're down into the water. So you may look at the shoreline and say, well, that's not too far to go. It's going to be a lot further than your mind can actually account for. If you can, climb on top of the hull. And we try to emphasize this fact as much as we can. It's easier to find an overturned hull in the water than this much of you sticking out of the water. Much easier to see that hull. If something is floating, pull that, and that can also help you stay afloat. Take a head count. Is everyone there? Is there somebody underneath the boat? And you have to start taking emergency measures. Wave your arms, whistle, try to get some kind of help. That's why we have those whistles on our life jackets. They can go, can be heard for quite a distance. And if you have a handheld, like Joe described, or if you have waterproof, a waterproof phone, a lot of them now are waterproof, activate it, call for help.
Oh yeah, right before we break.
Yeah, we'll
I
need
just
a
wanted
ditch, we'll need a ditch bag and then we'll break. 'Cause
Yeah.
then we'll start with anchoring when we come back.
Yeah, you're welcome to take a look at this either during the break or after, but we wanted to just show you a ditch bag and some of the things you might want to have in your ditch bag. If your boat does capsize or you do have to abandon ship, this should be readily accessible. So this is right underneath my ladder at the companionway, and my E-perp is mounted very close to it, so that would just go right in the pouch here, and you get in your raft or your dinghy. You know, the Chesapeake Bay, you're going to have pretty rapid rescue. You're not going to be looking at 24 hours of survival time in the Chesapeake Bay, one would think. And a lot of these things, if you have a life raft, there's a survival kit in the raft, so when it deploys, there is some equipment inherent in your raft. So you should know what's that inventory looks like, and either augment it or substitute it in your ditch bag. But so I've got a little template of what to say for a Mayday distress call for like my kids. They would literally just need to read this. And then, you know, there's some really important things like your visual distress and your VHF radio. I've got a bit of water, some food, an air horn. Again, so many stories of people that were within eyesight of other boats and they couldn't hear them.
Yeah.
And then I've got a mirror, I've got handheld flares, a rope, a kit in case my raft pokes a hole in it. You know, you might get panicked and cut it with a knife. And then I figure if I'm in my raft, I probably need a drink.
Always thinking,
That's
you
just
can run out of water. But
All right.
Take it from the doctor.
This thing floats?
Yeah, it does float to a certain degree. Mine might be too, it does have flotation. I actually haven't tested it with its current weight. That's a good point, to see if the amount of weight it's still considered float.
And these things, by the way, are, this is a different version of it. These things are great substitutes for flares. I still carry flares, but even extinguished flares. This is giving an SOS signal. So does the other one.
Is that float?
This too, yeah.
Yeah, this floats. These all are required to float. This combined with this is all you need to pass Coast Guard regulations. If you don't have flares, you're still legal as long as this works and you have one of these. This is the large flag with the distress flag with the black circle and the black square, and it's the international distress signal. This comes with, whenever you buy one of these lights, you get one of the flags with it. And when you use this flag, you don't necessarily want to hang it. If you're being rescued, you want to lay it out on the deck so the helicopter can see it. If you're all by yourself and you're trying to get somebody's attention, you might hang it on your cabin or on in your cockpit somewhere where it can be seen. But if you're being rescued, then you want it flat so they can pick it up off the helicopter. So yeah, these things are great. Again, I still would carry flares, but these are much safer. Kids can use these without burning themselves, without burning your boat down. Flares, you know, if you light up a flare, you always want to hold it overboard because the leavings from the flare will burn a hole in your fiberglass or cause a fire on your boat. So you want to always hold those overboard when you're using them. But this is a safety alternative.
We're a few minutes over.
Yeah,
so
we're a
if
few
you
minutes
wanna
over.
Take any last minute questions, or you're welcome to come up on the break, and we'll see you back. in
Yeah,
about
come up on the
37
break. We're going to take this just 10 minutes, please, and then we'll start with the rest of the
One question that came up during the
Where's
break
that little,
was about vessel exams and the Herrington Harbour North yard sale. We'll have a tent with a half a dozen vessel examiners, so just come up to us, sign up, and we'll send a vessel examiner.
Anybody see our,
Brad is getting us
I'm
the
looking it up
date.
right now.
Okay.
see our little football thingy? Did I have it? Oh, here.
No, Joe.
Oh, thanks. I can never find it. Okay, everybody, we're going to, we're running a little behind schedule, so.
It's, the boater yard sale is April 5th, and that's the same day as the new slip holder orientation.
No, he's talking about the Herrington Harbour North one, it's the end of May. It used to be June.
Oh, they moved it to May 31st? Okay. Let me check.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Okay, we didn't have time to talk about kedging, but we can come back to that if we have time. So the anchor. This is the stepchild of all emergency equipment. I don't know why. The Coast Guard doesn't even require you to have an anchor on board, but you'd be foolish not to have an anchor in a road. The road being the anchor line, of course. Because next to the VHF radio, we consider it one of the most important safety features on any vessel. And why is that? It's because if you're not stopping for lunch or stopping to fish or stopping for an overnight, if you have an emergency, you want to stop in the position you're in, if at all possible. And if, for example, if your emergency is your engine dies, let's just say there are rocks over here, or maybe there's shallows over here. You don't want to wind up either in the rocks or in the shallows. If you have a fouled prop, you say a line goes overboard and gets in your prop, you can't move. You want to stay where you are until you can get that situation resolved. So these are the things for which you need an anchor. And if you're going to call the Coast Guard on a Mayday call for help, you want to stay in the position you're in so that the Coast Guard knows when you're going to be where you told them you're going to be. And by the way, one of the things that we didn't stress in the early part of this presentation is tell your crew to be conscious of their location. If something happens to you, and you, of course, as a skipper, want to be always conscious of your location, because if you ever have to report a Mayday, the first thing the Coast Guard wants to know is your location. We're going to get into the 6 things you want to report. But the number one thing, if you report nothing else, is your location. Because if they don't know where you are, how do they search for you? So always be conscious when you're out on the bay, you lose track, it's a nice sunny day, and you're talking to your guests and you're watching where you're going, but you don't necessarily know, am I at Bloody Point Light? Am I down at Sharp's Island Light? Am I up near the mouth of the Severn River? Always kind of, this is called situational awareness. It's something that we train on in the Coast Guard. We want to always know what our situation is, because that's how accidents happen. You get distracted and you lose track of your situation. Anchoring is so critical as an emergency device for any kind, almost any kind of emergency. And so I'm gonna just run through with you some of the techniques that we. So these are just some of the other situations where you might want to have your anchor ready. Okay. When you're in an emergency, you want the anchor to hold the first time. I don't know how many times you guys have had to pull up an anchor and reset it. I've had to do it a number of times. But if you follow these instructions, you will anchor correctly the first time, because the first time may be the only chance you're going to get to anchor properly. So I'm going to do a little demonstration. I have a little baby claw type anchor. There are several different versions of this, Delta. They have all different names for these things. And then the most common one in the Chesapeake Bay is the Danforth, named after the person that invented it, but it's the fluke type anchor. So, and this one, being the one that's used most often, needs to be deployed correctly the first time, or else it may not hold. This one can self-correct. It sort of depends. It depends on how you've deployed it and whether or not it lands in some rocks or a grass bed that ties it up. Number one thing when you're going to anchor, you have your anchor spot picked out, and you're running your boat up to your anchor, preferably upwind or up current, whichever is stronger. Because then once you're going, let's say you're going upwind, and now the wind is slowing you down, don't drop your anchor. Never throw your anchor. I think all of you know that. You don't ever grab it all like this and just throw it overboard. The chances of it fouling are so high then that you'll never get a good, you're very unlikely to get a good set. You want to always let your anchor in slowly. But before you let your anchor in, you want the boat to be fully stopped. Preferably, you want it to start going astern. It doesn't have to be going fast astern, but you want it to be at least stop all forward motion and then starting to back away. And then you slowly let your anchor line out, okay, your rode. And here's why that's important. Let's say this was the Danforth anchor. So I've done this where you're at a fishing spot, you see a couple of boats and they're catching fish. You want to get into that position that you're going to fish from right away. So you drop your anchor before your boat stops. Well, now I'm letting my anchor out, but my boat is still drifting forward. So what my anchor is doing is it's dragging behind me. It's now facing in the wrong direction. Now I'm going to eventually wind up with the wind or the current pushing me back, okay, past where I've dropped my anchor. But whether or not my anchor will actually set now is a question, because I don't know if it's going to be able to turn around. Like I say, the claw type anchor will self-correct and it'll turn over and it might grab. But if I didn't do that, if I didn't make that mistake, especially with a Danforth, if I just let it out slowly while I was already going astern and let the line out slowly, the drag from the water will keep the anchor in the right attitude vis-a-vis the bottom, so that when it hits the bottom, it will be in right orientation to grab into the mud or the sand, okay? So I want to stop. That's really important. I want to make sure I stop all forward motion. And then always make sure that the bitter end is tied somewhere where, I mean, how many of us have made that mistake? That's a very expensive mistake. In an emergency, it could be the fatal mistake. So you want to make sure that you secure the road to something and let the anchor out slowly.
Joe, one mistake that I made for years when I started boating was I did come to a complete stop, and then I dumped the whole chain on top of the anchor. And that's a good setup for the chain to foul on the claw and not set. So that's the importance of drifting back so that you don't foul
if you let it
with the chain.
Exactly, and if you're letting it out slowly, that can't happen. And if you only let the anchor in first, not the chain, everything works fine, and you'll be in a much better position to have that anchor grab the bottom correctly. Use enough anchor rope. Okay, if you're having a lunchtime anchor and you got a nice heavy anchor, you may only need 5-to-1 ratio. But if you're going to be on the safe side, you want 7-to-1. 7-to-1 is the generally considered to be the safe ratio between the how much anchor line you have out and the depth of your water. But a common mistake people make is they look at their depth finder and they say, okay, I'm in 10 feet of water and I want 7-to-1, so I want to get 70 feet of line out. No. You want to count the depth of the water from the point on your bow where you're going to tie off that anchor rod. So if your bow is 3 feet off the water, you're not in 10 feet of water. You've got to consider yourself in 13 feet of water. Okay, so you want 7 times 13, not 7 times 10. That's very important, especially because if the tide changes, let's just say it's a low tide and you're in 10 feet. Well, when the tide changes, you could be in 12 or 15 feet. Well, now that throws off your ratio dramatically, okay? The more shallow you are, the more dramatic the tide's going to affect the length of your road. So you just want to keep that in mind. Always count the depth from your bow to the water, and then add the depth of the water to that to make the calculation of 7 to 10-to-1. 10-to-1 is for extreme conditions where you're expecting a storm or it's already blowing, then you want a 10 to 1. If you're not holding at 10 to 1, then either you're fouled and you're not holding, or you're not going to be able to hold. So once you get up to, once you drop your anchor, let me explain this little figure here, this flaking. So if you have, in an emergency, you often don't have this kind of time. But if you have the time to pull out your anchor rod and flake it on the deck, the flaking means pulling it back and forth like this. And you get a configuration that, not nearly that neat, but something along those lines. That allows you to make sure that your anchor line isn't knotted or tangled against itself or against something else on the boat. You know now you have free anchor line. You also, when you did the flaking, you maybe did a measure of your anchor line. Now, the way I do the measure is I just stretch out my arms. So, it's about 4 feet. If you're a bigger person, it might be 5 feet. But you want to just count your line like that. So if I want 50 feet of line, I'm going to do that 10 times, okay? And Paul has a much better technique. He's actually taken his anchor rod, and every so many feet, he's putting markers in it, right? That's the perfect way to do it if you've got time. Or if you have all chain, you can just lay it, you've seen people do this, they lay it out on the deck and then gets a spray bottle and spray every 10 feet or 20 feet or 35 feet or 50 feet, whatever they think is adequate markings for them to know how many, and then you don't have to count it off. You'll know from the markings on your road how much you've deployed. So any of those things work. Now, if you're dragging anchor, what I suggest to people to do is, once your anchor's deployed and you've got your 7 to 10 ratio in the water, your boat is being pushed away by the wind, or maybe you're in reverse and you're just kicking it in and out of reverse. You don't want to go too fast. You're getting it back further and further away from where you drop the anchor. And then at the last moment, when all your line is in and you're sure you're tied off to a cleat, then you can give it a little bump in reverse, just a little surge of power, just to give it that extra jolt to set it. After having done that, I go forward and I reach over the bow and I grab my anchor line. If it's vibrating, then I know I'm not holding. Okay? So always, that's the first thing I check, is for vibration. If my anchor line is vibrating, that just means that my anchor is being dragged along the bottom and it's giving off that vibration. So what can I do? If I'm 5 to 1 to 7 to 1, first thing I do is let out more anchor rods. And that'll usually correct the problem. If it doesn't correct the problem, and you're not in a storm condition where the problem is the wind is so violent or the current is so violent that you can't hold, if that's not the situation, then your anchor is fouled. Okay? Because if you can't hold 10 to 1 and you're still getting that vibration, you're fouled. You're going to have to reset. Hopefully, in an emergency, you're not having to do that. The next thing you want to do, once you've set your anchor and it's set, and you're not getting the vibration, you still want to take some bearings to make sure that you're not dragging anchor after 10 or 15 minutes or 20 minutes. And what we're trained to do is stand up on the bow. So now, theoretically, the anchor is set ahead of you. And so pick out 2 objects. So I can 120 degrees roughly apart. So here's Paul's, one of my objects, and let's say there's that beam over there is a buoy. So I look at let's say Paul is something on shore, and I've got this buoy, and I take these 2 bearings, and then I wait 15 or 20 minutes, and I come back up to the same spot on the bow, and I look again. And if Paul's still there and the buoy is still there, I know I'm not dragging. And I might do that again in another half hour or so, because I want to make sure I'm not dragging. I mean, if I'm dragging, I'm defeating the purpose. If the next time I come up there, I've got an angle like this, well, then I know I've moved. I'm not picking up the buoy anymore. I may be still picking up Paul, but I'm not picking up so I'm not, my anchor's not set. Okay? And the question is, does the GPS help you? Yes. The GPS is of today. You can set your anchor to show where you are. You can even set a circumference for your anchor, because if you're going to be, let's say, if you're going to be out overnight, then it's very possible that you want to set up an alarm on your GPS that tells you if you've moved off of whatever you set as your circumference. And that's your swing circle. Let's come to the swing circle. There's your, take your bearings 120 degrees, check your position often. A GPS anchor alarm is what the gentleman just asked me about. Very good thing to have, and very handy, especially if you're staying overnight, because if a storm comes up and you're asleep and you don't realize it, the alarm will go off and that'll alert you that because of conditions, you're now dragging anchor. And if there are other boats in the anchorage, you want to know that so you don't plow into somebody or somebody doesn't hit you.
Chairman, if I could, you can certainly use the chart plotter, but if you're anchoring overnight, it uses a lot more battery power. I have that, but I also can get like a Anchor Alarm Pro on your phone, and it works, I think, better than.
That's great. Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah. Well, the things.
$4.95 or something.
The things you can get on your phone are wonderful, and in fact, if you have Navionics, you can also, if your chart plotter craps out, the Navionics will tell you where you are, and it'll tell you your boat speed, it'll tell you a lot of things, and a lot of these things are free.
Why can't you, if you're
I'm sorry?
want to deploy 2 anchors, can you deploy one from the stern?
No, well, never anchor from the stern is what people say. Never anchor from the stern, because if you anchor from the stern and you're in conditions where the sea state is coming from behind you, then it will swamp you, because the boat can't move around, getting away from that attitude. You can anchor off the bow on a V, set one anchor, and then come back and go up and set another anchor, and that's fine, depending on the conditions. But if you're going to be overnight, that could work as long as you don't have to have a swing circle. If you do that at night and you have 2 anchors out, it's going to hold you in position. But if everybody else in the anchorage, let's just say this is a popular spot on the bay in one of these little coves, those other people are going to be swinging around, and so they're going to be able to glide in your boat because your boat's not moving. So you want to keep the swing circle alive, and the swing circle, as I noted on the slide, your swing circle is the circle that your boat can go around the setting of that anchor. And you don't count that from the bow to the anchor, you count it from the stern to the anchor. So, because your swing circle, if you're a 30-foot boat, if you don't count that 30 feet, then your swing circle is going to be misjudged by 30 feet. And so if you're worried about hitting the boat over here or the boat over here, and you don't account for that length of your boat, that's a big mistake. So always remember that when you're looking at your swing circle, you want to calculate the length of the boat. Oh, yes.
Hi, yeah, I guess I didn't understand, you were talking about the 120 degrees and using 2 things for your bearing when you anchor because of the swing circle. Aren't those going to change as your boat swings?
Oh, yes. The question is, when you're calculating, using your arms out to measure your location, that is only good for a situation where you're not swinging. If you're swinging, then you've got to make sure that your anchor is holding during the swing. And one way to do that, for example, if the wind, if you're in a cove, this isn't as big a condition unless a storm comes up, and pushes you with strong winds, push you, then you might still be holding, but you're just pushed way off of your location. But if you grab your line and it's not vibrating, chances are you're not dragging anchor, you're just swinging. So in that situation, again, you have to use your best judgment in the situation, but your chances are your anchor's still holding, it's just you're swinging. But then you take a new bearing. Once that wind pushes you in a new position vis-a-vis your anchor, then you take another setting so that you can see, well, am I dragging now? Now that because of the Danforth anchor, it may be that the Danforth might move, but if the Danforth moves too much, it's going to displace it, and it won't hold anymore. So you need to be careful with that type of anchor to make sure that it accommodates to the swing. If it buries deeply enough in the sand or the mud, and the swing is not dramatically fast, chances are it will keep holding, and it will just keep pushing, pulling, and digging itself in as you turn. So, but you just have to remember what's going on the bottom. You know, don't just think of what you see on the bow. Make sure you think about what kind of anchor do I have, and how did it set, and am I still good? And if you have GPS, then that's an extra measure of protection that you know what your distances are, and you're still in the circle, the safety circle that you set on your GPS on your chart plotter. But good question. Now, the last thing I wanted to mention, a lot of people don't think about this, is the sea anchor. I'm surprised how many people have never purchased. This is a small sea anchor. Right? I used to use this on a little 70-foot Montauk that I had at Boston Whaler, but they make them all sizes, and every boat should have one of these, especially if you go out in the ocean, if you're out in the ocean and you lose power, you're not going to be able to anchor. I mean, unless you're a tuna fisherman and you got laundry baskets full of extra rode, which we used to do. And if you want to go out in the canyon and anchor overnight, you're going to need a lot of extra rode, unless you are a serious violator and you tie up to a lobster trap, which is very illegal and could get you killed. Lobster fishermen don't like that, and they have shotguns. So you don't want to tie up to a lobster trap. But if you need to slow yourself down in the ocean, and you can't have enough anchor rode to hit the bottom, which is likely the case, a sea anchor is great. A sea anchor is even great in the bay. If you get a squall and you want to keep your boat, the pointy end of your boat headed into the wind, that's what this does. See, it's like a cone. It's got an opening, and what it does, you tie it off to some dock lines, whatever you have, and set it off the bow, and then let it deploy naturally. As the boat is pushed back, it will fill up.
How far out do you let it go out?
How far would you let it go out? It sort of depends. If you have 25-foot dock line, maybe if you have two 20-foot dock lines, I might use both of them. The further out you go, I think the more drag you have. But even 25 feet is amazing. If you're in a blow and you have 25 feet between you and the anchor, it's going to keep your bow into the waves, which is important, because you don't want to get sideways to the current, to the waves, or else you'll broach, and you certainly don't want to get turned around all the way where now you're getting pushed. The waves are coming over your stern. These things, you can fold them up and store them, and when you need them, boy, they're amazing. Sea anchors. So
if you want to get this beyond, it depends on the period of the waves. You want it on the other side of the waves, so that when the boat rises in that wave, it's not going to take a shock load. So the line should be long enough to pass the next wave set and stretch to reduce the shock load on your bow.
That's a good point. And if you're in the ocean, the period can be pretty good, pretty large. But
a common question we get is what's the best anchor? And Captain Westbrook a couple weeks ago put up a nice chart. The most important thing about your anchor is that it's sized right for your boat, or upsize is always better. But the reality is we're blessed with really good holding, thick mud clay in the Chesapeake Bay, where all of these have excellent holding power. So the truth is any anchor you have, so long as it's sized properly in the Chesapeake Bay. When you get into the Caribbean and you talk about sand, there are other more superior anchors like the rock nut. But here we're fine so long as you have the right scope put out and the right size anchor. And then the other question I was going to ask you guys is if you've ever had trouble weighing your anchor. So you've anchored, you've been in the cove all night, and now it's time to go home. Have you had any trouble getting your anchor up? Right? Yeah, so that's part of the blessing and the curse of that thick mud. So when you're bringing your anchor in, either by hand or with your windlass, again, it's all about geometry, and it's the angle, right? So what we do is we bring it all in until the boat just like stops, right? And then it just takes some patience, because what's happening is it's becoming more and more perpendicular to the seafloor, and it's breaking that mud. But it doesn't help to try to outmuscle that. Just wait, or ask the helmsman to give it just a little pulse forward to break that out of the mud.
Yeah. Sometimes if you're directly over the anchor, the wave action by lifting and lowering your boat will gradually loosen that anchor. another technique is to just make a circle around where that is. And then if you know how to use one of those big red buoys, that's another technique you can use. You can buy a rig that has a stainless steel U, almost like a circle, and you attach that to your red buoy, and then you put that on your anchor rod, and then you run, say that your anchor is this way. I'm going to latch that big red ball onto my anchor rod, and I'm going to go at a 30-degree angle, and I'm going to run past where the ball is and keep running, and that ball will eventually sink. Because of the pull of the vessel, it will go down, 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 all the way down to your anchor to where your anchor is, and it very well could release it. In fact, that technique is used by a lot of people that just have too heavy an anchor; they don't want to lift it, so they just use the ball and run the boat past the anchor, let the ball go in all the way down, and then all of a sudden, up pops your anchor, and it's now on the surface. You just pull in your rod, store it, pull in your anchor, and you're done.
The ball is attached to the fixed point.
Sorry?
Is it attached at a fixed point or it just slides down?
No, the ball, the U joint of stainless steel ring that goes around is free. It's free to, that is, the ball is attached to that and free of the boat, and then it follows the anchor rod all the way down. So now I want to show you one other technique, especially for sailors, especially for folks that are staying overnight in a whole hurricane or could you put on the anchor for me? So I'm assuming that anchor is set. Okay, I don't know if any of you have heard of this. It can be called a sentinel or a cullet. And I wanted to demonstrate this technique. This is a miniature version of what it would look like. All it is a pulley and a heavy weight. This happens to be just a trolling weight. It's not that heavy, but you'd want to use something heavier like a window weight or something like that, that really can get down in rough, because this is something you would use in a condition. Let's say you're anchored and you weren't expecting a storm, which happens a lot. The weatherman's often wrong, and you get a storm. Well, now you've got all this anchor rod out, and you're afraid it's not going to hold. So you want to add a little extra help. And don't forget, the anchor holding is dependent on the angle of the anchor rod to the boat. So the more shallow that angle is, the better the hold. The less shallow it is, like when you're pulling your anchor up, the more likely it is to let go. Well, this technique allows you to accentuate that horizontal direction that you want your anchor. So you get your pulley, you get your heavy weight, and a level line, and then you watch what happens. I'm going to just let this line, this anchor weight, down my anchor rod, and look at what it's doing. It's changing the attitude of my anchor line, and it's making it almost flat, which is great for holding power. Okay, so I don't know if you can all see that because it's on the floor, but what it's done is it's dramatically changed the direction of. I'll do it again. So you can see it. It's dramatically changing the attitude of my rod vis-a-vis the bow of my boat, and it's making it almost flat, which is going to increase your holding power pretty dramatically. It's called a sentinel.
Will it stay there? I mean, the boat is heavy. Boat can pull this whole line back. Whole thing can come up.
Well, no, I'm going to tie this off as well.
I know, but why won't it lift it off the bottom?
It will.
It'll lift.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You mean if the wave action?
Yeah.
Yes, but you still have now this extra 3 pounds, 10 pounds, whatever you put on there, of weight.
That much you put on.
Well, you can put in as much. I mean, if you have a 40-foot sailboat, you're going to want to put on several pounds of weight. I mean, it doesn't have to be that much, but the more weight you have, the more effective that this technique will be. So, but suit yourself. I mean, I wouldn't go to anything. I mean, I think perhaps with a big boat, I think one of those big anchor weights that you used to use on the windowsills, that hold your window from that would be plenty. If that doesn't work, get out of there and go home, because the storm is too bad.
This is why your chain is your friend, because in the Chesapeake Bay, most of us have a line road, chain between the line and the anchor. And the rule of thumb is about the length of your boat. So I have a 30-foot piece of chain that's going to be heavy, and again, change that angle before the line. In the Caribbean, where you've got coral and things that could cut the line, there's a lot of cruisers will have all chain. You don't really need that in the Chesapeake Bay.
Okay, any questions about anchoring? Any of the things we talked about? Okay, Paul's going to talk about the VHF radio.
Yeah, we're getting a little short on time, so I'm going to be a little more brief than I would like on this conversation, because this to me is like in that top 5 for skills, is your confidence with communicating. Everybody gets nervous, even if they're calling the Marina to refuel. And so it's good to just practice this at home or on the boat. It's good to practice it on a working channel with friends. Get comfortable with some of the pro words. We don't have them listed up here, but they are really important, like say again, or how me, or the difference between over and out. And Dr. Captain Westbrook, emphasized that point too, that we never say over and out. That's like for movies, because it's conflicting messages. Over means my transmission, my statement is complete and I'm waiting for your response. And out means we're done communicating. So to say over and out is conflicting messages. So things like that, get used to the pro words, get used to the conversation. I'll often, as I'm approaching, recite what I'm going to say in my head, just so that I don't stumble, so Herrington Harbour North, this is sailing vessel Meritage, over. And then I'm waiting, right? And then they'll get on and they'll say, vessel calling Herrington Harbour North, go ahead, or switch to channel 6-8, and then I'll say, switching to 6-8 over, and then I'll go to 6-8, and we'll carry on with our conversation. But I've thought about it, especially if you're gonna have a conversation with like a bridge tender, or a large vessel. Think about what you're going to say. So the main points of the VHF, we've touched on this. So digital selective calling is a feature built into Coast Guard's Rescue 21 infrastructure for command and control for emergency communication. You do need an MMSI number. That's the Maritime Mobile Service Identity number. It's a 9-digit number. You register it. If you have a Boat US membership, you can get it for free. You put in who you are, what your boat's description is, your emergency contacts, and so when you hit that DSC button, all that information goes to Rescue 21, and if your VHF is equipped with GPS either internally or it's piped into your NEMA 2000 network, it will feed that information and broadcast it. So literally with the push of a button, you're saying you're in distress, this is who you are, and this is where you are.
And on that MMSI button, just quickly, this radio that I showed you has the GPS built into it and has the DSC button. And the question is, should I put the same MMSI number? The MMSI number is for your boat, Maritime Marine Service Identifier. This, if this is going to be exclusively used on your boat, you can use the same MMSI number. I chose to
insert it in it, though?
Sorry?
You have to put the number in it?
Yes, the directions come with the radio. It's a simple installation. Yeah. Make sure you do it right the first time, because you can go back and erase if you made a mistake, but you want to enter it correctly the first time, because once you enter it, you can't change it. The people at MTS, I think, have a way of getting in here and fixing that. You didn't used to have to send back to the manufacturer, but now I think MTS can fix it for you. They can also help you do it. But I wanted to just make this one point. I put a different MMSI number in this. When you go online and register, it'll ask you what your vessel is and all that, and your identifier. And I put my vessel in there, even though my boat has the same vessel MMSI identifier. But if I want to take this with me on someone else's vessel, all I have to do is go online and change the vessel that I'm attributing that MMSI number to, and then they'll know that when they get a signal from me, they're not getting it from me on my boat, they're getting it from me on another boat. Okay, so that's something to think about. If you do get one that has the DSC on it, you might want to give yourself the flexibility of being able to have a different number, they're all free, and then being able to use them on other vessels. Go ahead.
The NEMA 2000, but some of these older radios, I have one similar, doesn't take that, it only takes the 138 or something like
No, the 0183, yeah, yeah.
that. Does that still work? Tell you the signal.
If it has a DSC button, it'll work, but not with GPS coordinates. It'll only broadcast your pre-entered MMSI information.
It won't give them.
Oh, the question is, the NMEA, you're saying if my NMEA is not connecting to my chart plotter, then what do I do to get my GPS?
No, basically, there's,
Yeah.
the earlier radios don't take the 2000 NMEA.
That's okay.
They have the 138.
The 18 something,
Yeah,
that's
which
okay.
is.
You can still use that.
That'll still
Oh, sure.
show them your coordinates.
Absolutely. No, because that's a wire connection.
Yes.
Yeah,
it's a
and
wire
if
connection.
you have the old NMEA, the original NMEA, that'll still connect to your radio. Absolutely. So if you have the old NMEA connection on your chart plotter and you want to tie it to your radio,
Yeah.
just get those two pigtails on the back of your radio.
Yeah, I have that.
Yeah, that should do it. And then you'll know if it worked, when you look on your radio, it should tell you the lat long on the screen.
That's right.
It should tell you
Yeah.
the longitude on that.
The latitude and longitude,
Turn it on.
right, on your screen. When you turn your radio on, give it a couple minutes to connect. And then if your chart plotter has the correct lat long, that same lat long should show up on your radio screen.
All right, so you've heard this before. Mayday, Pon-Pon, and Securite are 3 levels of priority, with Mayday being the highest. Pon-Pon is a serious concern, but not imminent threat to life or property. So example for that would be if you were, let's say, taking on water, but your bilge pump was keeping up and your cabin sole is dry, but you have a reason to get back to port quickly. That's still a Pon-Pon because you don't know if that situation is going to change. So it would be advisable to call that in as a Pon-Pon. You're taking on water, the cabin is dry, the bilge pump is on, and we are expected to be in port in 15 minutes. That's a reasonable Pon-Pon. Again, it puts your situation on the awareness of the Coast Guard, and they may call you, they may ask for your cell phone number, check in with you. They're really good about this. One super embarrassing moment was when I was installing my VHF radio. I don't know what happened, it was a glitch, and it sent a DSC signal. And Coast Guard called me because it broadcasted my cell phone number, and I was like, oh my God, I'm an auxiliarist, I'm so sorry. But they were so diligent that they asked me to just look around, even though I was in my slip, look around to visually confirm that there was nobody else in distress, which I thought was impressive. All right, so the protocol for a Mayday is to say it 3 times and to state the name of your boat, the description, the location of your boat, the nature of the problem, persons on board, and any medical concerns or conditions. I prefer this mnemonic, the 6 Ps. Again, just like 911, they're going to want to know where you are first before what your name is. So the Mayday would look something like this. We are in Herring Bay near Red Buoy number 2. We are taking on water. We have 3 persons on board. 1 is a child. We have everyone wearing our life jackets. We are a 34-foot white sailboat, and we intend to stay on our boat and continue to de-water the boat. Did I say it was taking on water? I don't even remember.
Yeah. You did.
So you want to state your intention. We are abandoning ship. We are not being able to keep up with the water intrusion, or we intend to continue to de-water until help arrives, something like that. That would be, and then you wait, because it may take a minute for a response. And again, the advantage of this, rather than calling Station Annapolis right away, is that people around you are hearing that you're in trouble as well, and then the Coast Guard will issue a Pon-Pon, hello all stations, and describe a condition. They'll usually refer you to 23 Alpha, so you move off the distress channel. So if you are in the area, move over to 23 Alpha and listen to see if you can render assistance. I like this just because it's a sticker that's available. We were hoping to have some here for you today, but we don't. But again, it's another template. I have something similar to this as I showed you on my boat in my ditch bag that can give somebody that's in a stressed state, that can't think clearly, something to just simply read. So if you can find one of these, or something similar at West Marine, that would be great.
We're hoping to get more of those, it's just they're out of stock right now, so we couldn't get them.
Yeah. Well, in the interest of time, we're just going to wrap up with a couple of safety slides. Frank?
Yeah, we talked enough about the flares.
Okay, as Joe mentioned before, when you're using flares, and these are, this one is a day-night flare, because you can tell, can't see it, but if you run your finger over it, if it's a day flare, it'll have a sun emblem on it. If it's a night flare, it'll have a half moon, and if it's both, it'll have both symbols on it. You want to be careful when you activate these, you take the cover off, and you strike it with the striker on the side. This drops magnesium formula they have in there. As Joe mentioned, it will actually go right through your deck. And if it gets on your shoes, it's going to go right through your feet. It's that hot. So you always put it over the side, and you hold it, and you go for about, I don't know, 3 minutes or so, and they'll end. But don't assume that it's okay when you're not seeing the flare coming out of you. It's still hot. So what you should do is put it into a metal bucket, preferably, if you can.
Or else throw it overboard.
With,
We hate to suggest that, but that's what the book says.
But you don't want to keep this when it's hot in any place that could start a fire by maybe coming into contact with anything on your deck.
Whoops, did you want more of that?
What about the ones you fire with this?
Oh, the pistol, okay. That's good. We don't happen to have one here.
Yeah, it's in the orange kit.
Oh, you have it.
Yeah, Paul has different boxes for different equipment, which is really, really helpful because when you're in an emergency, you know which box is going to have which in it. And so he has a really organized way of doing that.
Okay, this is flare pistol, used to be called Very pistols. They fire these shells. Okay, what you do not want to do is take a shotgun shell and put it into one of these. It will explode. Okay, these are low,
Yeah, probably not much powder in them.
yeah, very little powder, but it's enough to ignite the shell, and it launches off a flare. You actually get a flare in the air. So what you want to do is put one in, you close it, and now what you have is a deadly weapon in your hands. You can kill somebody with this if you aimed it at them. So you always want to keep it up and not aim down, because if you accidentally fire it off and that flare goes into your deck, you're in for a lot of trouble. You always keep it up. When you're ready to use it, and you should only use it if you think somebody can see it, make sure the wind is behind you. Okay. Aim at a 45-degree angle. Hopefully, if you're on a sailboat, you clear of any rigging or sails, and then you fire it. Okay. It's very dangerous, but it's very effective. It'll put a flare up into the air about 250 feet.
For how long?
For about
A few seconds.
Yeah. No.
yeah.
That's why you want to wait till you hear an airplane or a helicopter, or you see another boat.
If you think somebody is nearby and you're just trying to get their attention, that's when you use it. Don't just fire these things off randomly, because you're just wasting shells. So make sure you're careful when you use it, though.
Okay, we showed you those.
Yeah, and the
We showed you
international
that.
flag.
And this is in the book that I showed you with the regulations. It's over there. There's a page that has, this is the Coast Guard's 16 illustrations of ways in which you can get help. These are all distress signals. Okay, firing the gun, flames on the vessel, foghorn, all these things. The flag, the square flag and the round flag. Anyway, you can look those things up, but they're just wanted to show you that.
Those are international symbols. The inland also has the flashing light, as I mentioned in the bottom. High intensity flashing.
Oh, and this reminds me that Doug was pointing this out, that some Coast Guard stations are recommending people have these orange flares for daytime. I mean, this is fine for the daytime. It means you're legal. Oh, shucks. I'm making a mess here, but I'll fix it. This is required for your daytime minimum, but if you have the orange flare,
It's the orange smoke that
Orange.
keeps pouring out.
they have found this is so visible for such a distance, and it's such a volume of orange smoke. If you've ever seen it in a film or a video or anything, it's just, these are remarkable. So what they're suggesting is that you supplement your light with an orange flare as a substitute for the flag. But the flag, you meet minimum.
So you must have the flag
You-
because the light is not visible during daytime. So if you go that route, you must. But at least in the Northwest, they were suggesting that in addition, carry the smoke flare because it's much more visible than the flag.
Right.
Is that smoke flare also, it gets on the deck, same type of thing?
No, I don't think it has flag. No, I think it's just, I would hold it off the side of the boat anyway, but
They usually canisters you just toss in the water.
Yeah.
You like
Yeah.
toss in the water.
it'll give
It'll
off
float.
a lot of smoke, a lot of big billowing
I wanna
orange
agree
smoke.
with that for sure.
And you use it only when you know somebody's near enough to see it, but that can be seen for some distance. I just wanted to point that out. So the fuel gauge, you want to just quickly we talk
Just
about.
quickly on the fuel gauge. Fuel gauges are notoriously inept where they break down over the years. And many people find that out at the wrong time. You're out there, and all of a sudden you thought you had half a tank of fuel, and you come up empty. The electronic ones, the new ones are a little bit better, more accurate, but they can still fail at times. You should get them calibrated every so often just to make sure that they do work. But the rule for fuel gauges is third of the fuel that you need to go where you're going to go, where you think you're going to go for the day, a third to get back, and another third in reserve, because you never know what's going to happen. You may go out with the wind behind you, and you're making good time going out, and then you turn around and come back into the wind, and you're going to be burning more fuel than you did going out. So that's what that third of the tank is. It's very definite to have. Can't always trust your fuel gauge.
Yeah, and the fuel, especially the analog gauges. The digital gauges, they say, are much more accurate. But what you should do is run your own test. Like what I do on my boat is I have a digital gauge. My analog gauge just stopped working a while ago. But the digital gauge tells me how much fuel I burned. And when I pull in to refuel, it's almost dead on. I mean, I'm within a half a gallon. If it says I burned 70 gallons, I put in 70 gallons and I can hear it gurgling that it's full. So it's really accurate. I mean, so it depends on you have to look at your own vessel, make a determination of whether you can trust the gauge that you're using.
Okay, yes, question back.
Just a minor comment that on my particular boat, the engines and the generator all operate off of gasoline, and the generator works off one of the two fuel tanks, and the other engine operates off the other two. So if you're using your generator a lot, you're going to burn a lot more gas on one of the two tanks.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so you want to make sure that you're not assuming that the other tank's full because you've been running your generator.
The gas gauge only tells you the overall amount you consume. So.
Yeah. We were talking about this before the presentation. I had a 28-foot inboard that we used to use a stick to stick down the tube into the fuel tank. So that was it. I could know for sure whether there was any fuel in there and how much it was. But the analog gauges are a little trickier.
Okay, quickly about docking. Most of you who've operated the boat have had the experience of having to dock it, so we're going to go through this quickly. Make sure everyone's sitting down, okay? Because you don't want somebody to fall overboard if you happen to bang into the dock or a piling. Keep your hands and feet, your legs, whatnot, inside the boat. Always use a boat hook. Old steam boat hooks, right? Ancient convention, really good. It keeps you, gives you 6 feet of distance between your body and whatever you're pushing against, which is very important. That's a good safety feature. You want to make sure that you do that. Never use your feet to push off with, because that's an accident waiting to happen. If you do get your limb caught between a boat and another boat or a dock, you're going to find the third use for this, which is a splint through a broken leg. So always use a boat. It's a proper tool to use.
When I'm coming into the dock, my grandkids are with me. They always want to help. And I tell them, please don't help, just sit in the center of the boat. Don't put your hand, don't touch anything, especially the gunnels of the boat. And you don't have to be going more than a mile an hour to crush your finger. Or crush your hand. So.
Okay, don't go too fast. Obviously, you don't want to bang into things and have somebody get hurt. Go inside.
Yeah, only as fast as you're willing to hit the dock.
Remember, one hand for the ship, one hand for you. You don't want to fall overboard. Some of the other things we talked about, making sure somebody on board knows how to use the radio if you have one. And look at a radar reflector. I'll do this to Joe.
Oh, yeah. Have all of you seen one of these things?
Yeah.
It's a very simple device. I mean, this thing can really save your butt. This is a radar reflector. They come folded up. I unfolded mine today and put it together so I could show it to you. We use this offshore especially, but use either a powerboat or a sailboat. A sailboat, you can hoist it up the halyard, and when you have this up there, you look as big as a big ship to a radar on a big ship. We were coming back from taking a sailboat back from Long Island many years ago. This was before we even had Loran on boats, and we were we came around Montauk Point, and it started blowing like crazy. We eventually were in a gale, a force wind, and we were in that gale for all day and all night into the next day. And there was such a pounding on this is a 43-foot sailboat, with such a pounding that we took that all of our electronics stopped working. So we had this up on the mast. Then we started heading west towards Atlantic City, and there's thunderstorms all night, fog, thunderstorms, no visibility. We were crossing the Ambrose Channel, which, if you're not familiar with the New Jersey coastline and all the way down into the Carolinas, the Ambrose Channel is what the big ships use when they're coming across the ocean. They don't go directly into New York Harbor. They come across and then they go up what's called the Ambrose Channel. It's not a marked channel. It's just called the Ambrose Channel. And they just flood the zone there. I mean, so we're coming through the Ambrose Channel at night, and we're seeing these big black shapes with some lights on them. And fortunately, they could see us on their radar because of this. I mean, this is so important. You don't need any electronics. All you need is a piece of rope and hang it from the highest point on your boat, and it can save your
Joe,
butt.
we're 15 minutes over, so let's take some final questions.
Yeah, we're going over. So thank you for your patience.
So there's another type of radar detector, the part of the radar reflector or the cylinder ones that you put like in the back stay or whatever. Are those effective enough? Are they as effective as those? How much is
I would imagine so.
The more surface area you have like with that, the better the reflection is.
Yeah. Yeah, and gloves, I wanted to mention gloves. We use gloves a lot of times on our patrols on the water, because there's so many situations in which, you could hurt your hands and then you're in trouble. Especially when you have rings on your fingers. We're required to take rings off, because if you're wearing gloves, you don't have to worry about that. Because there's some horrible accidents that have happened with people that have gotten their ring caught in something and they couldn't get their finger out. I mean, so gloves are a great thing. If you're using lines like on a sailboat, gloves are really a good idea. But if we're doing towing evolutions when we're out on the water, and these things will save your hands from getting cut up when you're putting ropes through hawsers and stuff. Anyway, you don't see many people wearing them, but they're.
If you're under sail, how can you deploy your radar reflector? Can you do it on a little flag?
Yeah. Right up to your spreaders.
Is that high enough?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Basically just above the water line.
Yeah, anything above the.
Higher better, but
Right.
it'll still be effective.
It's-
All the way.
Whether it would be effective.
Yes. Even on a power boat where you don't have much height, still, just the highest point you can get, just tie it off on something. This thing really makes your image on that radar for that big freighter, it makes you look as big as they are.
Yeah, and it should
Instead
be
of
on a flag halyard so that you can secure it taut to the deck, so it shouldn't be swinging around banging with your face. Yeah.
I didn't get a chance to show you this throw bag. Have you ever seen these things? These are really cheap protection. This is for somebody in the water. I have one on my boat. I carry one around to show on these courses. And all you do is put this ring through your hand, and then you open the bag up, and then you just throw it underhanded. And it's amazing if you practice. It's amazing how accurate you can be. And if you have somebody in the water you're trying to retrieve, and this is 50 feet. I think they come in 75 also. But anyway, you've got somebody in the water and they don't have a life jacket or they haven't grabbed on anything. Even if they have, this is one way to pull them back to the boat. You just leave it out, throw it past them so that they can grab onto it. They don't have to swim to it, and then just you can pull them back in.
We know
30
you're
bucks.
hungry, and we thank you for your time. We'll
Yes,
be here if you have
thank
more
you.
questions. Do you want to look at the equipment?
Thank you for your patience.
All right, real quick, the boater yard sale is the 31st, you're correct.
Oh, 31st of what?
May 31st. And then, right after this at 4 o'clock is our sock burning social today, so come on over. We got great Polish food and Virginia Mountain Music Band coming up. Yeah, and oysters. So 4 to 6, right over there.
And we will be at